Good morning, members, and thank you for coming along to the November meeting. Apologies for absence. We've got Lee Baker, CEO Buck Phillip, Christine Lawrence, Laura Williams, who's at her induction, Mandy Chilcott, and some of us may not be around for planning because we're going to have a discussion about the FIPL meetings and the way that the FIPL is administered. So we may not be around. So that'll be myself, Dominic, Jeremy Holton, Robin, Susan. So we may not be around for planning, but we'll see how that goes. Depends how quickly we do everything. Item 2 is declarations of interest and lobbying of members, and can I remind members that equally, if they feel they've predetermined anything, or they may have put out an opinion about anything on social media, that also needs to be declared, and they need to be considering what they might have been putting out on social media. So, starting with you, Robin.
No, nothing from me.
Jeremy.
I note that the trustees of the Darlington Heritage Centre have made a comment. I believe I still am one of the trustees of the Heritage Centre, but I have not been consulted about that particular statement at all, and therefore I do not feel in any respect bound by it.
Thank you, Stephen.
Nothing. No, Madam Chairman.
I had an email, but those who did reference the visitor centre.
I think we can take it as read, unless anybody else has. We all had I think there was 2 emails. Thank you.
Nothing, Madam Chair.
Nothing, Chair.
I have an interest because I'm on the Darlington Town Council, and obviously I'm a parish member of this organisation, and I have copied something that was published on Facebook and just repeated it back into that book.
Well, it's for you to decide whether you feel that you need to declare any interest that means that you might need to leave the meeting.
I don't think an interest will change my view, but I will just I was saying I have an interest, basically.
It's a personal one.
Personally, yes, thank you, Francis. It's like arm bending for my Thank you.
Francis?
No.
Dominic? Jeremy?
Nothing.
And nothing from me besides the 2 emails that we received yesterday. Thank you. Chairperson's announcements. My sad job to tell you that Mandy's mum died recently, and that's why she's not here today. So I have sent her a card, and I'm sure that we all send her our condolences tonight. Minutes of the meeting from the last meeting, which was the 3rd of October. Can I have a proposed correct record? Thank you, Mr. Ellicott, the seconder. Thank you, Mr. Petrinos. All in favour? That's unanimous, Judy. So to consider any matters arising from the minutes. Page 1, you'll need to catch my eye. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Thank you. Public speaking. We do have people that have registered to speak on item 9. So when we get to item 9, I'll call you forward if that's okay. So item 6 is the revised budget, and we have our new finance officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Item 6, revised budget report, represents our mid-year look at budgets, our review of management accounts, your opportunity for budget monitoring. It also includes this time a forward look at our medium-term financial plan, which has been updated using current assumptions. Sections 1 to 3 of the narrative report deal with our revenue budget position, and these link to Appendix 1. In the Appendix 1, what you have is a breakdown of our organisational structure across the budget headings. We provide the original budget that was set back in March, agreed back in March, our revised income and expenditure position for each of those budget headings, and the associated net expenditure and the variance between these. along with some notes on the core variances. The budget monitoring process that happens with the teams is that I sit down with all the leadership team and delivery team members. We review the budget position, both in terms of the core revenue budget, also fixed term elements, reserves position and projects. And that is what's represented to you in this report. The net organisational position is unchanged. We still have a core budget requirement of 2,964,000. And you'll see that key variances are explained in sections 3.3 through 3.7 of the narrative report. I'll make reference in section 3.3 to the local government pay award. At the time of writing the report, the local government pay award had not been agreed. We started the year with an estimate of 5% pay award in our budgeting, which was approved. In this revised report, I've estimated 6%, slight increase in that. The actual pay award has come through, and it's a fixed sum for the majority of the pay grades of 1,925 per full-time post, £1,925 that is, and then in more kind of senior officer posts, it's a 3.88 and 3.5% increase. Now, the actual impact on the organisation is about 5.5% pay award, so this will in effect represent a slightly improved position or a modest saving to those figures you've got presented before you today. The core variances I've listed are primarily in relation to income, so we have had positive trends in respect to National Park Centre income, car parking. We've also had a significant increase in the amount of income received, and we'll see that in a subsequent report this morning. The negative trends have been in terms of planning fee income. We've seen our audit fee increase, which is a national trend. We've also had other support service fees that have increased during the year. So that's primarily the kind of the revenue section of the report. Section 4 of the report is in relation to our top slice programmes, our partnership funds and our contributions to reserves. So we set this alongside our core budget to support the work of the authority and our partners. There are no anticipated changes in respect of this, so we are carrying through the figures that were approved back in March. But they are represented in Appendix 2 for you to review. Part 5 of the report deals with our capital and reserves position. I feel that good progress continues to be made in respect of our environmental resilience and the greening of our fleet. We've invested in more battery capacity at Pinkery. And during 23-24, we have added to the Pinkery EV minibus with a Renault Zoe EV in our pool car fleet, and also a Toyota Pro-Ace electric van to replace one of our Ranger Land Rovers. In Appendix 3 of the report, you'll find a detailed position on the reserves and projections for the next few years. In the final section of the report, I project forwards, and having come in afresh in these past 2 months, I've been able to review the medium-term financial plan assumptions and update them to bring them up to date in terms of our current budgeted process, look back at how we've done in previous years, kind of post-COVID, and really to reflect the latest position. This has led to a recast of the medium-term financial plan, the MTFP, and I've included that in Appendix 4 for you to view. And whilst there is a positive movement in terms of our non-grant income, kind of a projection of control on our expenditure over these coming years, we do still have significant gaps in the budget in the years ahead. For 24-25 and 25-26, we are in the region of having a £200,000 budget gap still. This ramps up in 26-27 to around about 250,000, and 2027-28 to about £300,000 of budget gap. We have faced a real terms cut in our national park grants based on CPI of approximately £2.9 million since 2010, when our national park grant was around £4.1 million. And in terms of cost projections, every single % on our pay award in future years will have a £30,000 cost impact on the National Park Authority. Beyond 25-26, our position sustainability comes into a very questionable position, without an upward tick in on core grant from DEFRA. We have our business process review ongoing. You'll see a paper for that this afternoon. It is essential to ensure that we have a realistic prospect of setting a balanced budget in future years, legal requirement for us. So really the good stewardship of the resources contained within this report and within this organisation is vital and essential in ensuring we have a viable, enabling organisation at the forefront of planning for the future as we progress through this year. I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions that members would like to ask.
Thank you, and I'm sorry that here you are to the first meeting to give us such depressing news, which we are aware of, but it's very stark when you see it written down there in that table. Any questions? Marcus.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you for that. I've read through this and read through it again. There's quite a lot going on, so thank you for that explanation. Well, I suppose my question is we talk about the budget gap, and we've got your 20, obviously the 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28, where you're looking at 291. Are we to assume that when it gets to 28, 29, hopefully we'll all still be here, that it's only going to get, that's going to basically exacerbate onwards, I suppose. And I think you said about for every 1% in the pay award, it costs the authority £30,000, and I think it was, then the pay award, depending on your point of view, I suppose, could be looked at being slightly, maybe not as good as it was some people hoped for, and therefore going forward, if that's rectified, that 1% could actually, that 30,000 could be an awful lot of 1%, if you see what I mean, going forward, if that pay award actually is probably ends up ever being what it should have been. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think so.
Shall I respond to that? If I respond to that, in terms of the pay award, it's actually progressive. So at the £1,925 per post is around about 9.5% for the lowest pay grades, and that decreases up to 3.5% for the maximum pay grades. So in terms of that, it's a progressive award in such, so to speak. In terms of our current assumptions, yes, the medium-term financial plan does look bleak, and that medium-term financial plan doesn't take into account the business process review that's ongoing. So that is a sense of look at what would be if we continued on this track. Is also, as I've mentioned, assuming flatline national park grants, which is our core income. I mean, our percentage of pay, core pay, as a percentage of national park grant, as a percentage of our total income, is gradually increasing. So the gearing of that is it's a really difficult one to manage. So without an increase in national park grant, which is essentially the bulk of our income, we will see an eroding of our kind of spending power in services if we just stand still.
Marcus, did you want to come back at all? No.
No, I think that's fine.
John?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. How gloomy. But not unexpected, because we've been getting these things for years now. And I remember, well, I didn't remember because it was slightly before I became a member, but for the last 10 years there's been a huge erosion on the number of people working here and the things we do because of the inability of us to fund it. Did I, for the first time I think though, in what you were talking about, I seemed to pick up a hint that you were talking about in 26, 27, the possible section 114 notice, effectively saying we wouldn't be able to continue to do anything beyond our absolute statutory minimum activities. In a similar way, many local authorities have already gone to the wall in that way. Thurrock and Woking and Birmingham and all over the place. About 8 of them, isn't it? Was I right? I know this all depends, of course, on your crystal ball gazing, looking years into the future, and it depends upon the assumptions you make. And if you make different assumptions, you'll get different things. But clearly, you're an accountant, so you're going to make prudent assumptions, which is fair enough. But was I right in detecting the 114? And have you come to the right place? It's worth.
Thank you, Mum. I'm not hinting at that at the moment, although the end place of this, if you continued on those assumptions, would be that position, yes. But we have got a business process review ongoing that is likely to at least bring a balanced budget in 24, 25, 25, 26. We have got a significant level of reserves at the moment which would support. We are making plans to bridge that gap in future years as well. So I'm not hinting at Section 114 at present standards, no.
Well, that's reassuring.
So we've got 2 or 3 years to, you know.
I think its reality check is that there's very few local authorities will be spending any money beyond what their core activity is, the way things are, and depressing it is. Evelyn.
I'm just trying to get some context onto these figures, and we've already heard that there's an ongoing review, and that's not taken into consideration in these figures. That's correct, isn't it? So I'm interested in the National Park Centre's sales income and expenditure, because it's suddenly going to go up next year quite considerably, which is exciting. But if we're not going to do anything different, are we sure that that's not just guesswork? If you look at National Park Centre's income, it will go up from 99 to 140. So maybe we should just be running shops if that is, if that's reality. But everything else is very similar to how we are now, but the National Park Centre, there seems to be a big change in income and expenditure.
Unfortunately, it would be fantastic if it was just the income that we were looking at. In terms of National Park Centres, there's a cost of goods sold.
Oh yeah,
So,
I know.
so
I'm just wondering how we get either.
And bear in mind that the kind of the start of that appendix is in effect coming out of COVID situation. So we're looking at quite a low level in retrospect, really. Sorry, I lost thread slightly. Yes, we are projecting an increase in income. That's based on income to date. It's based on the trends that we are seeing post-COVID recovery.
But it doesn't take into account any change in operation.
No, as I said, this assumption continues through as at current metrics. Thank you.
Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Ben, I wonder if you could describe to us the process that, should the authority feel it needs to provide government with a Section 114 notice, the process that then happens. It's quite interesting. Could you just describe to members what happens and the consequences of
it? In essence, we get to the point where we see we're not a viable, sustainable organisation moving forwards. So we would essentially go to members, go to government, and freeze all process, freeze our assets, prevent expenditure from moving forwards. There's a very different position to where we are currently.
Do you want to come back, Jeremy?
Yeah. The explanation I had was that then civil servants are sent down to take over the job, and they perform the job that officers were doing, but at the prices they charge, and that the government lends money to the authority to get itself back on track, but all that expenditure and lent money then stays on the shoulders of the taxpayer or the taxpayers of the area. So it is not an easy or a good route to take, and you can find yourself with, as an authority, back where you were with even more borrowing and more problems. That was the point I was trying to get through, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, it's a position that we would not want to be under.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I just thought it was worth us
It's worth having that.
understanding that
It is.
now. I'm sure we don't get there.
I think we need to keep in the forefront of our minds, we need to be very, very prudent to avoid that at all costs. It would not be good for us as individuals, us as members, or for the communities that we represent and the landscape of Exmoor if that was to happen. Andrew.
My point wasn't going to be around Section 114, but I will make a point on that. I do a lot of work with local authorities, And when you see them going to 114, it feels a lot different to the situation we're in now. And I can see many areas that can be managed without going anywhere near that. So I'm surprised we're even talking about it, to be honest, because there's lots of room in here to do things. When you're dealing with children's services, mental health, then you can't move. You know, there's lots of things we can move on. So I think we're way off that. Is that right, Ben? Yeah. So I think
very eloquent.
yeah, with Birmingham, they've done lots of things wrong, and yeah, we're in such a different situation than the reserve we've got. My point was on actually going forward, the service review you're talking about, looking at the costs. You said that clearly the big cost, as it is for most authorities, is salaries and staff, and that's what I was saying to Sarah. Staff is obviously an asset, and if you maximise them, that's great, but it's still a cost. So I presume as the service review, you'd be looking at how, for example, we mentioned then the centres, we'll be allocating costs of staff against those, so you can have a real comparison of services and what they're actually costing, as opposed to now we're looking at income, which actually, as you say, is almost meaningless unless you, what does it cost you to deliver that income? And I guess the service review will look at the income and look at the gross profit and operating profit of each of those services. Would I be correct?
Thank you, Ben. Yes, that would be correct. I'm looking at quite a granular level, income and expenditure of those services and the business process review, so forecasting forward over the term of the medium-term financial plan, what impact those changes would have on the authority in respect of those costs, but also those changes as well.
Good. I guess there's always going to be natural wastage. And I suppose the positive news, the savings have got smaller, haven't they? Still savings, but the positive news, they've got smaller. So thank you much.
Yeah, it's not quite as bad as it was, but it's still bad. It still seems an awful lot of money to try and save. Mike?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This sort of illustrates the importance of the business review that we're undertaking at the present time. Is there anything coming out of this report that's suggesting that our business review needs to be revised or more of a challenge, or are we still on course in terms of what we're doing? So, in other words, anything new coming out of these prudent projections that suggest something other or additional work needs to be undertaken in terms of our business process review?
Essentially, whilst there are kind of glimmers of light and hope in the slight reductions in the medium-term financial plan, we are still facing sizable cuts. So I don't think there's any real changes that are happening to that business process review. We are still looking at the same quantum of savings to be made in the long-term position. Sarah,
And Sarah's going to step in here.
Thank you, Chair. We will have a brief opportunity at Member Forum to go into this in a little bit more detail, because the discussions that we've had so far about the targets that we've been setting by section, I can run quickly through with you. Just to reassure, we are on track, but we can't, every decision is a difficult decision and we need to make it, I suppose. That's what I'm saying.
So yesterday I spoke to Sarah and I said that I expect that the business plan is to be the first item on every Members Forum agenda from here on in, and I do expect members to attend because this is our most pressing issue at the moment. So we need to all be informed about what's going on and realise that we need to keep our foot on that pedal if we are going to keep this authority going in the correct, prudent way. Nick?
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose if you look back, West Somerset Council had a similar problem that occurred, and they were close to declaring Section 114. The thing that they did is was go through and identify what were the statutory requirements. I don't know if we've actually done that here, but certainly they went through the statutory requirements, what was required, things which led basically to things like selling off toilets, because that wasn't a statutory requirement. I just wondered if we have a list of what we're duty bound legally to provide, as opposed to what we do because we want to do it.
So the Chief Executive will reply to that.
I mean, essentially, the things we have to do is we have to run a planning service because we are the local planning authority. Yes. We also have to produce a partnership plan and a state of part report. Most of the other things we do are discretionary. So we are here to deliver government's agenda around nature, climate, access, people, local economy. So it's clear what our agenda is. How we choose to do it is up to us. So it's more difficult in a way for us because we don't have a very clear list of we have to deliver education, we have to deliver social, whatever. There's a lot more discretion in what we do.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. It's not an easy task and it's not an easy position we're in. But thank you.
Susan?
Yeah, just to come in on that point in terms of, producing a partnership plan, which is a huge undertaking and, involves a lot of identification, working with stakeholders, and we have a key role in that. And as you say, how you can't sort of pick and choose bits within that. So, that the plan itself, to deliver that plan and deliver our national park purposes, we need to be instrumental, leading, partnering, and working as part of that. So we can't just, there aren't just bits we can just say, not this bit or not that bit. And of course, when you work with nature doesn't work like that. And you can't just say, well, we'll look after this bit of wood, or we'll do this bit, or we'll do that species, or not this bit or that. It all interconnects. And in terms of looking at landscape scale nature recovery, which is, core purpose in terms of biodiversity and climate change, it becomes very tricky, unfortunately, to be able to hide bits off, because it doesn't work like that for us. So we're, very different to a local authority in that sense, aren't we? Yeah.
Yes, it's far more complicated. It might be small amounts of money, but it's far more complicated here than it is when I'm sat at DCC, where I know exactly what our statutory responsibilities are. The decisions are no easier here than they are there. I can absolutely say that. And I frequently say this now, I did not get elected to oversee a load of cuts. And that's all I seem to have done for over a decade. Anyway, moving on. Robin.
Thanks, Andrea. Just thanks, Ben, very much for this. I can't think of a more challenging time that you would have arrived to have had to pull together a budget statements and a medium-term financial plan. You're kind of looking into the distance with no view as to what's likely to happen at the moment. There's a feeling to some extent, and we've just had a chat around sort of what our statutory purposes are, statutory requirements, what we have to do and what's nice to do. And what's frustrating is there is a feeling amongst that I've had over the last few years that national parks, especially through the medium that we no longer belong to, have successively overpromised to government what they will or can do in order to make, in my view, successive Secretary of States feel good about what's happening around plans. There's a frustration there because although that was presented and promised, the funding behind it was never came forward. So we ended up carrying the can for an awful lot of activity and direction, which is not part of our statutory requirement, and being expected to fund it. And with a move currently into a more project-based type funding approach, and we only need to look at FIPL, the landscape recovery type approaches, everything else. What we can't do is be part of that if we haven't got a coherent structure at the core to manage and deliver that. I think there's some around the sort of the policy that we present as a national park forward to government all the time, and I think we've got to be clear about that. But we've also got to remember that we are looking at the work we're doing about our budgets, and actually we've really got to grasp some of this. I've sat here for quite a long time and seen members deliberate, just for example, maybe overcharging over a car park or keeping one set of toilets open. It's really great to do, but the reality is that is not our statutory purpose, that is not our role, and if that comes at the expense of the stability of the core structure, then it's really wrong that we be doing it. We've got to be looking quite clearly at what we have to be doing in the future to make sure this national park continues in the form it has been in the past. So, on that basis, I'd like to thank Ben very much, and I'd like to move the recommendations in front of us.
Thanks, Robin. Can I have a second? Oh, Bill.
I was just going to, before we move to that, just ask a couple of more mundane technical questions.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah. One was on the Appendix 1, Item 6, the large 329,300,000 is there's no note with it, and I couldn't remember. As a new member, I just wondered what that
line was.
There is-
Land and property services, it's
Ben?
down as land and property services. I wasn't sure why there's this sort of huge anomaly. I think I'm sure I should know, but I don't.
You're talking about the conservation advice and support?
I'm talking about land and property services under...
Oh, land and property services.
Yeah. The budget was 49, then it went to 329, 300, and then expected to go back to 550, 100 next in 23, 24. But there's no note there, and I couldn't understand what that line was. Sorry, back.
Yeah, there isn't a significant variance on that line. This is so land and property services. It's both our management of our estates and also our facilities. So this building, our toilets and car parks, etc. So the actual net position is unchanged virtually by about 1,200. Haven't got the detailed breakdown about what that constitutes, but the 329,000 is the expenditure. That's offset by 279,000 of income.
Right.
To give that end position of 50,100.
And just so one other thing was this is more technical on the pay for medium-term financial plan. Sorry, we've got rents and contributions on the same line. Would it be possible to split those out? Because it seems to me that rents are more business and probably contributions are more voluntary. Is that so? I mean, so that rents are part of our business, which is part of our estate business, whereas contributions are more fundraising and public contributions, I guess.
Contributions in this sense are more akin to the CS schemes that we have in place on our land. So I can split them out, but it's not a kind of donations and contributions. It's
okay, so
a contribution for land management.
So it's actually grants and subsidies rather than...
Indeed, yes. Yeah.
Maybe that would be useful
so
as well then.
I'm happy to amend the narrative.
Thank you. Sorry, that was it, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a proposal. I have no other hands raised. Would somebody like to second? Evelyn. Thank you. All those in favour, please. Thank you. And thank you, Ben. That's unanimous. Item 7, again, back to Ben.
Thank you, Chair and members again. So this item is another aspect of our budget management and budget monitoring. We procure Somerset Council to manage our treasury management activities. We have a new service level agreement with them which was originated there in this year. This is a very beneficial arrangement to Exmoor National Park. Somerset Council sweeps our cash from our bank accounts to their main accounts, bringing our bank accounts back to zero. Somerset Council then brigades the EMPA balances with SC balances and lend to the cash market. We receive the overall rate earned by Somerset Council Investments, less a small administration fee. So in the report you will see that the first 6 months of 23-24, this has earned a total of almost kind of £69,000 in interest after our administration fee comes out. So for the year, the 6 months in question, this equates to a return of 4.67% with an average balance of 2.9 million. We follow the overriding principles from the guidance on local authority government investments in England, and which gives priority to security and liquidity over other areas. The authority's aim is to achieve a yield commensurate with these values and principles. So as well as reporting that figure of interest received, the report also deals with our statutory reporting under the SITFA Prudential Code and SITFA Treasury Management Code of 2021. This recommends that members are informed of treasury management activities and status at least twice annually. Section 3 gives you an idea of the economic background, which I find always kind of informative to read, and this is provided by the Somerset Council team. But it's always useful to see kind of what the context is of kind of what we're working within. Section 4 is a statutory element and deals with our debt management. I'm pleased to report we continue to remain debt-free as an authority. And Section 5 details our compliance with prudential indicators and other requirements. In the final section, we have an outlook for the remaining quarters of the year and also look forward to future years in terms of the forecast interest rates. At the time of report writing, the table in part 6.4 indicates the forecast 3% interest rate at September 2026. I know that the Monetary Committee at the Bank of England have kind of revised rates in the most recent week or so. That is still a 3% balance there for our interest, but also potential for concern for cost of living awards in terms of pay awards, as we've already discussed at reasonable length this morning. So in summary, it's quite a brief report. It complies with the requirements of the CITFA Code of Practice, provides you as members with your kind of a summary report of the Treasury management activities for the first 6 months of this financial year. And I confirm, as per the report, that no prudential indicators have been breached and that we are operating a prudent approach in relation to our investment activities. And I'll draw that proceed to a close.
Thank you very much. Mike?
I'd like to recommend really support the recommendation.
Thank you. So being asked to note, does anybody, any questions, or would somebody like to second it? Robin?
Just one. Obviously, with all the press around what's happening at Somerset Council currently, our money, is it financially secure under the current situation? Well, I thought it might be quite important to ask. Disappear somewhere. And especially for the public record, because I'm sure someone somewhere will want to be certain of that.
I'm going to say yes, it is. In terms of counterparty levels with Somerset Council, we need to watch this space as it goes along there.
Thank you, Ben.
Well, any more questions? Would somebody like to second it? Bill, you seconded. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you very much. I note with interest the interest rate. One starts thinking about one's pension then. Right, moving on to item 8, risk management. Ben, back to you again. Thank you.
I'm afraid you've got me again, members. Risk management is an absolutely essential aspect of our governance framework. It's the responsibility of the authority to oversee the risk management arrangements on an annual basis. It is the purpose of this report to state that the review of risk management has been completed and to provide the authority's health and safety policy, the strategic risk register, to members for approval. Section 1.2 provides a definition of risk management which we adhere to, and I thought it would be quite useful just to read that out to you. So it's the identification, the measurement, the control and financing of those risks which threatens the existence, the assets, the income or personnel of an organisation or the service it provides. This is expanded in our report to section 1.3 and kind of detail more specifically what we aim to do in our risk management activities. As an aside, our insurers, Marsh, or our insurance brokers, undertook a UK business risk report, and the following risks were significant risks across UK businesses. So the first one, most common, was financial uncertainty, 34%. We've seen that this morning through our debating the revised budget and our position. The second one was employee mental health and well-being, that's 31%. The third one, perhaps not so relevant to us but still has some implications, is supply chain resilience and disruption, 23%. The fourth, talent retention, attraction and succession planning, that's 22% of businesses. And the final one on there was health and safety of the public and employees at 21%. And I think you'll see through our strategic risk register and our approach, our health and safety and welfare policy, that these are kind of very much alive in our risk language. As a leadership team, we have reviewed the process and key aspects are detailed at length in section 2.1 of the report. I'll draw your attention to section 2.8, which details some of the changes from year to year. So this is a dynamic document, but it doesn't change a significant amount year to year. But in section 2.8, we see that there is an increased risk and impact at the level of national park grants. We see, and it's a kind of an element that Robin brought out a short time ago, the impact of sufficient staff to chase external funds. The impact of the latest pay award, the potential impact of future awards. As a reminder, 1% equates to roughly £30,000 impact for us. Risks around protected landscapes and legislative risks. As March, our insurers found out, employee mental health, well-being, alongside talent and recruitment, retention and attraction. There's reputational risks alongside our nature recovery strategy. And there's finally the National Park Partnership working. In section 3, I explain the process which is followed, the meanings for ratings, and the charts and the risks which are contained in Appendix 2 our strategic risk register. Now, this has changed somewhat since last year. We've kind of increased our kind of language and explanation of what the impact and likelihood and the ratings of risk are, just for your kind of information, really. As members, I'm asking you firstly to note the annual review of risk management has been carried out. Appendix 1 contains our health, safety and welfare policy following the annual review, and members are asked to approve this as part of this process. We have in Appendix 2 our strategic risk register, an accompanying chart of kind of metrics of where each of those risks is positioned in terms of our situation. And members are also asked to review the risk register and note that our business continuity and disaster recovery planning is in process. It is a significant concern for leadership team and delivery team members, and we do review this on an annual basis. Welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ben. Andrew.
Thank you, Ben. Looks very good risk analysis, and I've done some myself, so it looks like very good practice.
Andrew, can you put your mic on?
Sorry, I'm a junior here still, yeah. Thank you, Ben. This is very good, and I'd say in accordance with policy is good practice for risk management. I'm going through it. The one item which stands out to me, which perhaps could do reviewing, is on item 4. So I'm looking at Appendix 2. Item 4, 4.2. Am I right? This combines two risks. I've got to 4.2. Around business continuity. Two risks which I've come across in my mind. One is loss of Exmoor House, and I refer to South Oxfordshire experience where they lost their buildings overnight, so it does happen. And cyber attacks. They've been clumped together. Recently, the local authorities have done a review of their cyber attacks, and we need to think about Mo Valley recently had an issue, Capita. So when you look at the likelihood of, you've added those two together, or not, sorry, not you, the report added those two together, and makes them negligible, because you add those two together, it's 1 + 1. I would have thought they ought to be split, and the likelihood of a cyber attack happening, I would think, is quite great. The impact can be managed, but I can't say you can stop the likelihood. The likelihood of Exmoor House burning down, flooding, or fire, I guess, is quite low, but the cyber attack just struck me that those could have been split out, because they're very real. I mean, I've seen it many times now of cyber attacks impacting authorities.
Added to that, if I may, Ben, when we had our auditor come and speak to us, he actually honed in on cyber attacks big time, if you recall. He actually gave us all a big warning about cyber attacks and the risk, so I think that's a very prudent comment there.
Yes, I do agree. That sounds a very sensible option. I'm happy to either amend the report now or to make sure that future inclinations of that as a separate item. Our IT team is working on both of those areas. We are migrating to Microsoft 365, doing a lot of VMware assessments, endpoint assessments.
Yeah. But of course, even your cloud, they can still get into the cloud and still do more in some ways. So yes, in some ways you're more reliable when the building burns down, but you've got more vulnerable to cyber attacks. So it just sucks. Whether that's done next review, but fairly soon, or revised, I'm not sure.
Well, just thinking about what our auditors said, because it was specifically mentioned, it might be a good idea, and I'm sorry to create work, if you could just revise it and split them out and just send it round to us all so we can see that. And then we will have also paid attention to what we were told by the auditor. Are we all happy about that? Okay. Evelyn.
Just a small point, really, and it relates to some of the other things we're discussing today. When we're looking at number 7, reputational risks, we actually highlight gear management, nature recovery strategy, shooting, swaling. But I think the biggest risk to reputation is going to come out of our review of our service, because if we're feeding out various decisions that require cost cutting and they aren't going to necessarily be greeted with great enthusiasm by the people who live in the area or our partners. And so if we trickle out the results of our reviews in a inappropriate way, then our reputation could be taking a knock on a regular basis. And so it's really important that we manage the communication of the changes that, albeit reluctantly, we may have to bring into operation. But that, for this particular period going forward, is a major reputational risk.
Ben?
Thank you, Chair. And Member. I cannot disagree with that.
Yeah.
Cannot disagree with that.
John?
Thanks. This is about Appendix 2 again, so we've got turnover. And it's a bit of a nerdy one, because I used to do this stuff as well when I worked for a living. Yeah. But one of the principles I always was taught about risk management scoring was that you've got an inherent risk, and then you can do things to make it less likely to happen, which is great, which is the whole point of the thing. But if it were to happen, even though you made it less likely, the impact would still be the same. Therefore, the impact score wouldn't go down. Now, but there's 26 risks in the risk register, 26 number of rows, and 16 of them, the impact score has gone down. Now, if they hadn't gone down, the profile of risks in that final colourful box would be much worse. I'm just wondering about, and I'm sure there must be an instance occasionally, once in a blue moon, where the impact can be changed. But 16 out of 26 isn't that infrequent. Sorry to be a bit nerdy there.
Ben, what do you think about that then?
I'm not sure I can really come back on that other than to say that we do the inherent risk, and then we look at mitigating that in terms of our controls. So I'm not disagreeing with you on that subject, and this is the process that we've built up over several years and continued over several years. Something I'm happy to review over this next period, but I'm not in a position really to change it at this stage.
No, I'm not suggesting changeable. I'm just saying that if you could sort of bear it in mind in the future and perhaps look into whether what I'm saying is true or not.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got no other hands. Oh, Robin.
Just yeah. A couple more. One was around the sort of the reputational risk, and that's probably the discussions we've had. An awful lot of the reputational risk is centred around our media presence, and that's both from individual members, what they put out, and what the authority puts out as a whole. I think we're fortunate that we do have a media presence that's very well managed here, and our thanks to that. As was noticed recently, another national park inadvertently put out a tweet a couple of weeks ago that, taken out of context, appeared to put those people living there in direct confrontation with the national park. It's something we've got to ensure that we manage, and as members we've got to be aware of to reduce that risk, because it's very easy on social media to drop yourself into that situation. I think there's an opportunity as management of that risk to make sure that we put out those positive messages and keep people well informed all the time to reduce that reputational risk that can come from lack of information an awful lot of the time. The other one is just around my comment on the previous item, around the risk of running the authority. With the uncertainties that we have at the moment, where our core funding sits and is invested, is there a risk at some point that money may or may not be accessible to pay staff immediately should a Section 114 end up being in place at a last resort at Somerset or something like that? I'd hate to be in a position where we were unable to access our day-to-day running monies to ensure staff were paid to date. Is there anything that should be in there around that bit? And that's a question, really.
Thank you, Robin. This isn't something I'm going to have to actually go back and look at in more detail. I've got a catch-up session with our tourism management advisors on Thursday this week, so it's probably something that will rein significantly in there.
I think we're all now this question's come up, we're all going to be thinking, gosh, we hadn't thought of that. So could you let us know what the answer to that one is, please? We don't want our assets frozen by anybody that might come into another authority. It's basically what you're saying, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Okay. Well, on that cheery note, Francis.
Yes, of course we absolutely need the answer on that. However, it is my understanding, as having been explained to us, that the payments of staff and existing contracts are sacrosanct.
That might be where at that authority. I think it's slightly more complicated. This is our assets being held by another authority. We need to know that answer to reassure ourselves.
But I do think we're jumping at shadows at the moment.
Well, maybe, but it's right that we are cautious
Absolutely.
with public money, remember. Okay. I cannot recall, I'm so sorry. Did somebody propose this? Did you, Mike? You did, didn't you? No. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I wasn't pointing at you. I just, honestly, I got this complete blank in my head because I started thinking about other things.
I am happy to propose.
Thank you. Evelyn, you're happy to second, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you. So moving on to item 9. And we do have some public speakers. So what will happen is we'll have a presentation so we know what we're talking about, and then I'll call you forward, if that's okay. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. You've got a report in front of you detailing some proposed changes to our National Park Centre services, and that hopefully provides some context for you, as well as a series of recommendations. And in addition, members will be aware that we published and shared yesterday some responses to various questions that have been asked of us over the weekend from members of the public in response to some of these proposals, and hopefully again that provides a bit more detail as has been requested. And I think I'm very keen up front to stress that the recommendations we've put before you have not been made lightly. I think the presentations we've already had from our Head of Finance have hopefully helped clarify the need to make some of these decisions, and I think if all things were equal, we wouldn't be proposing these changes. But in the context of the savings that need to be found, we feel that this is a workable solution. And we've heard a lot about the desire locally to retain things as they are, but the reality is we cannot continue to do all we once did. In real terms, we've had that significant cut in funding, so we cannot continue to do everything we have always done in the same way. But by way of background, really, I'd like to talk you through the paper fairly briefly. By way of background, the kind of role of the National Park Centres is very much around kind of deepening people's engagement with the National Park and directly delivering against both of our statutory purposes and our duty. And we kind of sum it up as really informing people about the opportunities and the experiences, the expectations, practical information of the work of the National Park Authority. It's around inspiring them with the special qualities of Exmoor to get connected to nature, to get involved and to give back to the area. And it's about equipping them to get out there, to explore, to understand and contribute to looking after Exmoor as a special place. And we very much deliver this through face-to-face interaction with users. Our staff are by far our greatest asset, the fact that they can respond and provide bespoke information, to a whole myriad of inquiries. In addition to the kind of interpretive displays and the interactive elements that we have in the centres as well. But, fundamentally that people presence is the main function, really. We take quite a different approach, and we're probably a lot more proactive than a traditional tourism information centre. We're always keen to refer to them as national park centres. They are there for everybody, whether a local resident, a community organisation, a business or a visitor to the area. But for many people, the National Park Centres will be their only direct interaction with the National Park Authority, and they do provide very much a shop window for our work and our engagements. And they're used by a huge range of audiences. I'm always surprised when you go and spend a bit of time in the centres, just what a range of audiences you get. And as I've mentioned, local residents, businesses and visitors, and it's kind of young and old. we get both first-time visitors, repeat visitors using them, and you also get those people who've got a real in-depth knowledge already of the national park and want to come and really drill down into some fine details, but equally you've got the people who walk in really with very little understanding or awareness of what a national park is and what it's about, and who are kind of keen to find out. I think within the report we've detailed how visitor numbers to the centres have recovered very well post-COVID. I think, you know, if the trend that we've seen for the kind of last 6 months or the first 6 months of this year, if they continue for the rest of this year, then we will be well up on our baseline of pre-COVID. So that's very positive. You know, and we've kind of forecast there, if the kind of percentage growth that we've seen so far this year were to continue, that's where we would be. So certainly in the first 6 months of the financial year, we've had a 31% increase on the same period last year. And I think, you know, most anecdotal feedback has been that this season has been pretty quiet on Exmoor, so to have achieved that growth, you know, is quite an achievement. And I think a lot of that will be down to some of the improvement works that we completed last week and last year, not last week. And you know, those works are very much intended to drive footfall into centres. They were saying we knew we offered a good service, but from outside it wasn't clear what the centres were doing. They weren't particularly inviting, so that work was very much intended to draw people in and then to deliver the great experience that we already have done. In terms of financial performance, spend has grown year on year if we exclude kind of, you know, the COVID years, when we've obviously closed for significant periods. And so similar to visitor numbers, despite the cost of living challenges, we further increased spend by about 35% in the first 2 quarters of the current year. And increases in spend will be partly down to rising prices, but obviously they are well ahead of inflation, and we've consistently met or exceeded our target of 40% profit margin. And while we're comparing to 2019 to track with that kind of pre-COVID baseline, it also coincides, I think, with more of a focus on the retail element and making the centres pay for themselves further. We've got a bit of data from the Association of Cultural Enterprises, and that suggests we're doing very well compared to other free-to-enter kind of heritage attractions. So our conversion rate, which is the proportion of visitors who actually make a purchase, is at or slightly above the industry standard, and the average value of transactions is considerably higher than the standard. And also when you look at the kind of cost per engagement, so really our net cost of running the centres divided by the number of people who use them, our kind of cost per engagement is very similar to centres operated by other national parks. And we know that our centres, you know, they're award-winning, they've got very high levels of customer satisfaction, and they are delivering well against their mission. So to kind of conclude the background, I guess 3 general points are that, you know, the centres are relevant, the customer feedback, the trends, you know, the numbers really speak for themselves. They're working, as we can see from those kind of figures, and they're valued. And I think that's demonstrated not only by the user feedback, but also the strength of feeling that has been shown locally towards some of the proposed changes. And so, whilst this is by no means a failing service, you know, it is delivering public benefits well, but despite that positive direction of travel, the centres are a net cost to the authority, and they are likely to always be. So in 22-23, the total cost of providing the free centres, the kind of net cost once we allow for kind of retail spend, etc., came to £155,000. It was budgeted to rise to £170,000 this year, but strong retail performance, you've just seen in the papers before that we've kind of, the gap has been reduced down to £162,000, but that is still a huge figure for us to find. And I think it's important to stress that they never have been, and I personally don't think they ever will be, a fully commercial kind of entity. They are not run as a shop, they never have been, they never will be. That isn't a role for us as a National Park Authority to play. You know, their primary role is about engaging people with the National Park and kind of engaging them with our special qualities. So that's the kind of challenge we've got, and we've not been immune to the soaring energy and utility prices, and the other increased costs in terms of staff and goods, etc. So I think it is very much with a heavy heart that we are proposing 4 changes which would reduce our spending by an estimated £50,000, and that will be part of the contribution towards this overall business review. And while staffing and things is delegated to Chief Executive, this one's been brought before members as it is a more of a significant change to the service. So briefly to summarise, we've got 4 proposed changes. The first and probably the most significant, and the one that certainly attracted a fair amount of interest, is the proposal to relocate our Dalton National Park Centre with a seasonal service offered from here within Exmoor House. Obviously here we have got the opportunity to co-locate within our current building. This would operate from April through to October. Currently it's about 80% of our footfall in the Dalton Centre is occurred within that period. So, you know, but it is, whilst the centre is open year round, it is very seasonally biased. The primary focus of this kind of revised or relocated centre would be that face-to-face information provision, which we know is the most valued and important thing we do. We would offer some limited retail sales and interpretation displays as well. And I think really, you know, it would make better use of a currently underutilised asset, and it would also provide some wider corporate benefits to having that area manned for at least 7 months of the year. And it's been very hard to kind of pinpoint one centre over another to change or to radically, you know, kind of move in the same way. But I think, you know, we do have to be realistic that Dalton does have by far the lowest footfall. So last year it was 21,000 visitors compared to 42,000 at Dunster, which is only open seasonally, and 74,000 at Lynmouth. It's the most expensive of our centres to run in terms of that cost per engagement. It's coming in at about £2. The spend per head is slightly higher at Dalton than in our other centres, but obviously, as I say, our primary purpose is to engage the public, and I think if it was fully commercial and the spend per head was higher, you'd think great, but actually, as I say, the net cost to us is still there. We've also got a potential to reutilise the assets, and I think it's important that we consider today that the focus really is about the decision around the National Park Centre service. Once we've got a firm decision, we can then explore more fully what the options might be for our premises there. What we haven't done within the savings figure is allow for any income that we might acquire through potentially rental of that property or some other use of it. We've allowed for kind of reduction in our liabilities of our costs, but we haven't calculated anything else, so that would be on top if we were to achieve it. Obviously there is a question around the library, which is co-located. It's quite a complicated situation, that building, how it works, but you know, in effect the Somerset Council have a right to use their space, so that would not be impacted if we were to rent out our space and do something different with it. And I think there are some concerns that have been expressed about how well a centre would be used here in Exmoor House, and of course some of you may remember, and it was before my time, but previously there was a centre based here, and you know, at the time it was seen as a better move to move into the high street. And again, I think if we didn't have to find these savings, we would probably look to remain where we are. But I think, you know, we do feel that we are beside one of the main visitor car parks. We've got the campsite behind us, which is one of the biggest accommodation providers in the area. Already we get a significant number of people, you know, even this week coming into reception asking for visitor information who we redirect up to the centre. So, you know, we feel that with the right signage, with the right approach, we can make this work. And at the moment we've been pretty prudent, I think, in our financial modelling, and so the savings that we've kind of presented in this paper have assumed just 20% of the current retail profits being retained in this smaller centre, because obviously we'll have a smaller selection, but that hopefully also provides more space for others in the town centre as well to move into that space that we leave. So that's the first suggestion around, or recommendation around, relocating the Dolben Centre. Our centre at Lynmouth, we are proposing that we would reduce the winter opening hours. So at the moment, during the period of November through to March, 84% of our spend is between 11 and 4 p.m. So we'd be looking at reducing our opening hours by 2 hours, so a 20% reduction on our current opening hours of 7 hours a day. We've allowed for a slight loss in terms of profit foregone, in terms of the savings that we've calculated, but we realise some much more significant staff savings through that move. And I think, you know, our feeling is that wouldn't have a significant detrimental impact on users, and it would help us to maintain that year-round facility. There would probably be some savings in terms of energy and utility costs, which again we've not factored in for that, and obviously probably any savings in use would probably be offset by increasing costs anyhow. We're also looking preferred proposal, which isn't really one for members to take a decision on, but I think we felt we just needed to present the whole package together, is around restructuring the remaining centre teams, looking at how we reduce some of the double manning where we don't always need to have two people present, none of the centres are ever fully double manned, but some of them do have some double manning throughout the week. We'll be looking at reducing that by a day a week at Dunster and Lynmouth. And we'll also be looking at that kind of proportion of management time versus kind of information advisors as well. And then the fourth recommendation is that we would withdraw the modest grants that we provide to two external centres, and this is locations where the National Park Authority doesn't have its own presence, in Coomartin and Porlock, who receive £3,000 at Coomartin a year at the moment and £4,000 a year from us to Porlock. And these centres offer a very valuable service. You know, they are well loved by their communities, but I think it's fair to say they have got much less of a focus on the National Park and our own core messages, and they've again got significantly lower footfall than any of our current three centres. So again, if we look at the last full year, 22-23, Porlock had 13,500 visitors, Coomartin 4,500 visitors. So, you know, our support there is one part of their overall funding. You know, I don't think either centre is in a very strong position financially, and so I think even if we were to continue our funding, there's no guarantee that they wouldn't have to be making changes themselves. But at the same time, you know, I don't think withdrawal of funding would come as a surprise to them, and obviously are aware of the proposal, and we have been talking about it for some time, but we would need to relook at that in the future. So, you know, we've also given some thought as to the value of retaining those grants, and I think, you know, the opportunity cost of that would not be setting up something in reception here, and I think our view is that this would give us some coverage in Southern Exmoor. It would give us something that is focused on the National Park and our core remit, which is why we've gone with that recommendation. So section 5 of the report details the savings that we've calculated through the different measures. I think in terms of the timings, you'll see that we are proposing that these changes would come in effect basically in 12 months' time. So we would operate next season for the rest of this year and for the main peak season next year as is. And then we would look to introduce these changes in terms of the funding for the external centres. We would reduce that by 50% in the next financial year before we're fully withdrawing it the following year. So again, it gives them a kind of step transition. So happy to answer any questions once we've heard the public statements, but that's all from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I see we've got, for some reason, statements to be read out. I think we can all read, but I think these people have been told that they'll be read out. Would you like... No, there's others as well. So are you reading these out?
I believe I am.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so I believe that we've got a representative from the Town Council, and we've also got Margaret Wall here who will read their own or present their own. So I've got three others that have been asked to be read to you. So the first is from Chris Nelder, Chair of the Trustees of Dalton Heritage Centre. We feel that by removing the visitor centre to Exmoor House is not the answer, as visitors are not going out of town to seek it out. It was noted that Dalton has the least footfall and is one of the reasons to close it. To our minds, this only makes the problem worse, as it merely reduces the amount of visitors visiting the town, the very thing our town doesn't need. If it is not viable, a much smaller setup is required, sharing with similar requirements if necessary. Without having all the figures to hand and resources and time to research this conundrum, I'm sure there is better ways of saving money and showing that ENP should keep a profile on 4th Street for the benefit of the town as well as Exmoor National Park. We are adjoining premises and one of Dalton's visitor attractions are very much against closing the Dalton Visitor Centre. The next statement is from Steve Hall, representing Exmoor Studios Community Interest Company. I appreciate that all local authorities are under considerable economic pressure at this time. However, I would have liked to have seen all the proposals for cost savings before commenting. It would appear to me that a decision to cut the budget of the visitor centres has already been made, and if this is the case, then the proposal in this paper is balanced and seemingly well thought through. The moving of Dalton Centre is regrettable because of the impact on the town. We already have a large number of empty premises which does not reflect well on us. Another closure which might be filled by a new business, however unlikely that would appear, right in the heart of the town, is to be regretted, and I hope that an alternative way of cutting costs can be found. And finally, I have a statement from Ali Pegram on behalf of members of the Dolverton Partnership Group. The members of the Dolverton Partnership would like to take this opportunity to express their strong objections to this proposal. The Dolverton Partnership comprises of a group of council members, Dolverton Heritage Centre, Dolverton Town Hall, Dolverton's town traders, and those with tourism-related businesses in the town. Members believe strongly that moving the visitor centre into Exmoor House and away from 4th Street would be detrimental to the town and to the national park itself. Members accept that the footfall has suffered a decrease due to the COVID lockdowns, as well as a considerable number of lengthy road closures. However, the centre was closed for a refit during this time, which would also have affected the numbers. With regards to the statistics and financial figures used to support the proposals, members are not convinced that they provide an accurate picture of the financial position of the ENP centres involved. For example, further information is required regarding staffing levels, running costs for each unit, and any additional income, such as for hiring out space, etc. It is interesting to note that according to the figures provided, the spend per head for 22-23 for a Dolverton Centre is £1.12, whereas the Dunster Centre is calculated at 69 pence. In the view of the members, the outcome of implementing the proposals will have the following effects. Trade will be lost on visitors who have come into the town centre specifically to visit the ENPA Centre and learn more about the park. By removing the visitor centre to Exmoor House, it is unlikely that visitors will go out to the town centre to seek it out, not just for the inconvenience of the walk, but because it will not be as readily visible and accessible to the visitor as it currently is on 4th Street. In addition to the points above, should the Dolverton 4th Street Visitor Centre close, this will leave the only accessible, visible ENPA visitor centres being located in North Exmoor and none in the south of the National Park. The catchment of a visitor centre in Dolverton covers an enormous area of South Exmoor. These visitors would thus travel to the north of the moor to learn more about the National Park and miss out on Dolverton entirely. It will undermine the considerable efforts that have been made to increase footfall by implementing a proactive events package. Unlike Dunster, which is a destination, has the attraction of a large castle, and Lynmouth, that has the attraction of a coast, Dolverton is required to, and has been, working hard to raise its profile within Exmoor and in the southwest as a whole. New and innovative events have been created by the partnership with a specific aim of encouraging visitor footfall in the town. Once again, Dolverton appears to be suffering in contrast to Exmoor's coastal towns, all of whom seem to receive or have access to funding that Dolverton and the surrounding area does not. The members raise the question, where is the balance? Members have learned that the Visitor Centre was once located in the ENP offices, but when the Dolverton Heritage Centre was set up in its current location, the centre was moved into the centre of town. Members assume there was a good reason for this move into a more visible location, and thus ask the question why it would be thought wise to move it away again. At a phenomenally difficult economic time, when the high streets are struggling to survive and local businesses are failing, members strongly suggest that now is not the time to remove visitor centres from the very places where we need to attract visitors to maintain any form of economic stability.
So, Mrs. Rawle, you're first on my list. Can I ask you to turn the microphone off, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret Rawle, Winspear House. As an accommodation provider welcoming B&B guests to Dolverton for the past 25 years, I strongly object to the proposal of moving the National Park Centre from the town centre to Exmoor House. The Visitors Centre has just been nominated for an award and had a major refit last year, which has enhanced the visitor experience conveniently in the centre of the town. Access to the library when it is closed is via the Visitors Centre. Has this been factored into the equation? Dunster and Lynmouth sell themselves through the castle and the coast. Dolverton is the gateway to Exmoor from the south. Visitors and locals alike need the centre to be central and visible not hidden away in the foyer of the National Park Office. The educational benefits of the displays in the centre, from history to the dark skies information, are first class. Visitor centres should not be penalised, but one could accept reduced hours at a push. Don't pick on Dalverton, please. So much hard work has been taking place by volunteers in the town to increase footfall through increased events arranged since COVID and the numerous road closures which have affected the town's economy in the last couple of years. Have you thought about the safety of the increased footfall of visitors to Exmoor House, negotiating the traffic at Lorna Doone roundabout and the car parks, trying to cross the road with caravans and motorhomes entering and leaving the caravan site and vehicles coming into the car parks? I don't think so. It's a dangerous area for pedestrians. Please look at this proposal again and endeavour to save money in a different way and keep the National Park Visitor Centre in the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Raw. If you leave it on, then we've got Mr. Gash who can come along and take over the microphone. I will ask you to turn it off when you finish, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
My name is Bill Gash. I'm on the Town Council in Dalverton. I have a sort of prepared statement for them, which might have a familiar ring to it. I'll start by just making 2 points from item 9 from Dan's presentation. Firstly, as you'll note from his forecast for this year, Dalverton footfall to the visitor centre is up by 30% on the previous year, and that's despite, if you look at item 3.3, a refit programme which meant it was closed for a number of weeks. And under 2.9, I'm going to ask a question. You're forecasting income for 23-24. I don't see a forecast beyond that. Similarly, in item 5, you look at summarised savings, good, but you're not indicating what your projections are in terms of loss of income. So, those things I think are, you're not a business. If I was a business manager and I was looking at closing a store, I'd be interested in what the opportunity costs. What am I going to lose in terms of customers and income? The following statement from the National Park Authority. The members of the Dalverton Town Council would like to take this opportunity to express their strong objections to this unexpected proposal. Moving the visitor centre into Exmoor House and away from 4th Street would be detrimental to the visitor, to the town and to the National Park itself, and effectively is attempting to hide its closure, and this is a thinly disguised death knell for Dalverton's visitor centre. Members accept that the footfall has suffered 4% decrease due to COVID, as well as a considerable number of lengthy road closures. However, the centre was closed for a free fit during this time, which would have affected visitor numbers. Furthermore, we'd argue the ENPA has already contributed to the reduced footfall following the closure of the public toilets, which were situated next to the park's HQ. They were converted into an office video conference suite, even though it was pointed out that at the time it was unnecessary and the money could have been better spent revamping the existing toilet facilities. Passengers arriving on coach first acted to make use of the public facilities, and now they have a lengthy walk to achieve this. It's been seen the number of coach tours stopping or coming to Dalverton has subsequently decreased, and this is considered to be a contributing factor. With regard to the statistics and financial figures used to support this proposal, members are not convinced they provide an accurate figure of the financial position of the centres involved. For example, further information is required regarding staffing levels, running costs for each unit and additional income, for example, the hiring out of space, etc. It's interesting to note that according to the figures provided, the spend per head for 22-23 for Dalverton is £1.12, whereas for Dunster it's working out at 69 pence. The outcome of implementing this proposal will have the following effects. Trade will be lost to visitors who have come into the town centre specifically to visit the ENPA centre and to learn more about the park. By removing the visitor centre to Exmoor House, it's unlikely that visitors will go out of the town centre to seek it out, and will undermine the considerable effort that's been made to increase footfall by implementing a proactive events package. Unlike Dunster, which has the attraction of the castle, and Lynmouth that has the attraction of the coast, Dalverton has to, and has been, working hard to raise its profile in the southwest. Once again, Dalverton is suffering, in contrast to Exmoor's coastal towns, which all seems to receive the funding that Dalverton and the surrounding area does not. Where's the balance? At a phenomenally difficult economic time, when high streets are struggling to survive and local businesses are failing, now is not the time to remove the visitor centre from the very place where we need them to attract visitors to maintain any form of economic stability. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you mind turning the microphone off? Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, members. Francis.
First thing I want to say is to thank Dan very much for the paper. It's very helpful. It is a between a rock and a hard place paper, and I absolutely appreciate that. I want to ask some questions, and in fact, the visitor centre in Porlock is one of the ones I know well, but I take all the points that you've made about the grants to smaller centres. And the questions I want to ask are about the road not taken, as it were, about Dalverton. And I think it's worth thinking. We have 3 centres that we run. Dunster and Lynmouth are both relatively large settlements. There are a couple of centres that we don't run, Porlock and Combe Martin, which are more the sort of size of Dalverton. My question is what can you tell me about the consideration of different options to achieve the same result? And the different option that I particularly want to ask about is to understand the thinking around whether Dalverton, whether it should be sought for Dalverton to be run by somebody else and cease to be run by us. Now, I take the point that there are visitors at the caravan park who would come past Exmoor House on the way into the town. And there is a car park there, absolutely. Nevertheless, the footfall is generally in the town, and people, particularly from the car park, will go up the steps or up the ramp, up the road into the town. They won't come this way. If you come to the car park, that's how you're going into the town. It does feel to me that there is something very valuable about having a visitor centre in the middle of the town. And we have a model in Porlock. We have a different model in Combe Martin. I mean, I can't comment on that one. I don't know it well. Of a different way of doing this. And and there are various bodies who are clearly interested in the centre in the town, which I really do think would be beneficial to all if we could do it. And so, can you tell me about what discussions you've had with those groups or with any other groups about a different way of working for Dalverton?
Yes, happy to answer that. Then I think, there's a few comments to make. First of all, the centres at Combe Martin and Porlock are good centres. They offer a good service. However, as they're saying, they are struggling financially themselves. It's not an easy road to take, and they are considerably well supported by their kind of local councils, etc. I think, our big dilemma here really is the cost of the building. So, from our point of view as an authority, we have a liability there. It's quite an expensive building to upkeep. Now, we've had conversations with Phil who said, yes, if we were gifted the building and were allowed to operate rent-free or whatever, we could possibly look at putting volunteers in and running some kind of a centre. From our position, that doesn't help us because we would lose our income that we get, but we would still have that liability of the building. So,
but you're not talking about getting rid of the building.
No, we're not, but we are, as a service, looking at losing that, and then we would look at repurposing that. So I think that has been part of a challenge, in that, when you look at business rates, when you look at the energy costs, etc., they come up quite substantially. So I think, we have had some conversations with local organisations, but nobody has yet said, yes, they would want to come forward and run such a service.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again, Dan, for putting the case very well, very balanced way, all the information that we need, and I think I just want to and also thank also people, for members of the public coming along and speaking about it as well. It shows great commitment to Dalverton, and that's also heartening to see. I think there's a couple of one thing in your report that I would sort of slightly quibble with a little bit, which is around where you talked about how it will reduce our ability or opportunity to deliver against national park purposes. I think the reduction is actually quite marginal. We're talking about moving the centre, not closing it. I mean, there will still be a centre in Dolverton, and I'm just worried. I want to clarify that because I keep hearing, and I've heard it from some feedback here, that, oh, that's it, we're no longer going to have a centre in Dolverton. That isn't true. There is already a very significant Exmoor National Park Authority presence in Dolverton. And I also, because I've spent most of my life living in cities, I find it hard to understand the idea that moving something 30 seconds away from the high street is some great distance. And I'm sorry to put it that way, but again, if you're a city person, you'd find that hard to get your head around. And this is right next to the car park. Again, this is my advantage as an outsider to be able to see these things, perhaps. So I don't see that as a huge problem. But this opportunity to deliver our purposes, which is after all what we have to focus on, is against what baseline? Because, of course, over the last 10 or 15 years, we've been able to have other opportunities through technology to promote our purposes and to promote education and information about the park, for instance, through websites, through our social media presence, and so forth. Just the ability to actually disseminate information now is considerably, I mean, by a huge order of magnitude, cheaper and easier to do than it was, say, 20 years ago. So there is a danger that we compare ourselves to a baseline of how things were. Whereas actually, I would argue that even without the financial squeeze, I think this would have been a good opportunity to look at our national park centres and actually ask ourselves, in this case, unfortunately, we're saving the money simply so that we can basically cover our budget loss, which is a shame. But in any other opportunity, it could be we'd be saying we'd be actually saving the money because we could spend the money more effectively elsewhere on other aspects of park purposes, such as nature recovery or any other things that we talk about. So I think the case you've made actually is a strong case regardless of our budgetary position. But I think in the context of our budgetary position, it is absolutely essential. One of these national park centres would have to close. It makes the most sense to instead get around that and say, well, actually, we're not closing it. We're still going to have a national park centre in Dolverton. We'll still have 3 national park centres, and that seems to me to be a very good way through it. So I'm happy to support your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak? Stephen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I do clearly recollect when the centre was here in this building, in the little low wing over there, and it was reasonably well used, and I remember lots of people going in, buying their little sheep rubbers and other things that these days would be regarded as merchandise beyond the pale, no doubt. Germans, the ironmongers, came onto the market, and we had a monumental effort to bring together Somerset County Council to buy the front, Dolverton Trust to fund the purchase of the back, West Somerset District Council to clear what was a rubble-strewn mess in the middle to make the Guildhall car park, to bring all of that together. So there was a huge achievement there, of which the park was a part, in creating a very exciting corner of the town, and I think we will all have to regret that this is a bit of a peeling away from that. I do remember at the time, just as an aside, that there were accusations that the park was empire building and was taking away a retail premises from the centre of the town, very clearly, but it is what one gets used to, and it is a key premise in the centre of Dolverton. I think we have to recognise that, and withdrawing the national park from part of it is going to be a very significant change, potentially a damaging one to the well-being of the rest of the town. So, if we do decide to do this today, I do think that, as per 4.4, it is very important that we do work up options. We don't just withdraw it and leave it as a fallow space. We work up options for how that space is used, particularly bearing in mind what we hope will continue to be its the library being located there, because that is an important facility, and the way in which, as those of you who are familiar with it will know, the library actually is co-located in a way that it is separate, but it is not divided. So sensitively treating that space is going to be very important so that we don't prejudice the continuation of the library service, and then that's another notch down of what Dulverton has to offer. So I do urge that we work with Dulverton Town Council and the Dulverton Partnership here to achieve an outcome for the social and economic well-being of the community as per our duty. I think that should be within our capacity to do that, and there is clearly a willingness on the part of Dulverton to see that if it is not going to be a visitor centre, that particular premises used for the benefit of the town and the community and the economy. And I'm sure that we should be able to do that. So can we just mark that we do work with the community to achieve that outcome. The second thing I wanted to say was in relation to the grants to the voluntary centres. So we have Combe Martin. I forbear to speak on that. I'll defer to Madam Chairman. But the Porlock Visitor Centre actually is a fantastic resource. It's a really wonderfully run centre. Those of you that go into it will know how welcoming and informative it is. Very well done. Again, if we are going to be withdrawing our financial support for it, I do hope that we can at least agree that we will retain and reinforce our moral and practical support for it, and that there are things that we can do above and beyond the strict and direct financial input that mean that that centre, means that particularly Porlock, will continue to offer a good service to the visiting community in the way that they have done up to now, because it is a good resource, and I'm glad to see Mr. James nodding his head there in agreement. They do value our support, and if we can't give it in straight finance, I do hope that we'll be able to do it in all of the other ways and possibly reinforce some of the things that we do.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I can reiterate that in Combe Martin, it's a very valued resource and very much used by visitors and locals, particularly in these times where it's been struggling with the cost of living crisis in an area which is known to be one of the most deprived areas in the well, it is the most deprived community we have on Exmoor. So yeah, it's been very highly valued, and it's very sad. And I do hope that the people here today realise that it isn't just Dulverton that these proposals are affecting. It is the whole park. It's all communities that will be affected by this. Fran.
Excuse me, thank you. I was trying to find how much the actual cost would be to convert in the Exmoor House. I couldn't see that when I was looking through. Has that been worked out yet? On what are you? It would be nice to have a bit more of the plans and more of that information. And I'd also like to really have seen more of a comparison if you could have maybe reduced more the hours, if you'd have retained the Dulverton Centre within the centre of Dulverton. I think this to me almost seems a little bit premature. I don't feel I've got all of the information of the impacts upon all of this, the financial losses, etc., of moving to here, and how much you're going to think this is going to generate compared to where it is in the centre. Having, somebody who doesn't live on Exmoor and does come here and think of it more from maybe a tourism point of view, for me, it's a better position to be in the town centre. I would rather be wandering around the town centre than coming here first. So that from that point of view, I can absolutely see the attraction of retaining it there rather than having it here. But I'd like to see a bit more information what you want the offer to be if it is here. I also think it's sad to lose or to take away the donation, the funding for Porlock and also Martin. I think from that point of view, that if you think of that side of Exmoor, I think that is a different way of going into Exmoor. If you're in Porlock, you think you're in Exmoor. Coming from Taunton, for me, if I was going to Exmoor, I would be going via Minehead, Porlock, and then up over onto the top. And that's what I've always known and always think of as Exmoor. Dulverton to me is quite new, only since I've been part of the Exmoor Park. So I think you need to, for £7,000, and I know we've got to cut and make difficult decisions, it seems a very small amount, and maybe for some benefit for visitors in that area. So I am a bit concerned of removing £7,000.
Thanks, Fran. Did you want to come back now?
Yeah, I can answer most of those points quite happily. I think if we start with the last one in terms of the local grants, I guess our thinking here is that we would still have our own presence at Dunster and Lynmouth. And I think when we look at visitors to Exmoor, they do tend to travel. You know, very few stay in one location, so that would kind of give us some coverage still on the north coast. And you know, ultimately it will be for members to choose. But you know, £7,000, yes, you can argue it's not a lot, but we do have to find big savings. So if it isn't £7,000 coming off of here, we will need to find another way of saving that funding, because you know we've heard from our head of finance the gap that we need to cover. I think in terms of downstairs, this is the start of a process, and obviously we've allowed ourselves kind of 12 to 18 months to transition. It wouldn't have been sensible to spend a lot of time and money drawing up detailed kind of designs and plans for that space if we didn't have the support for the recommendation. I think we've got a range of options, but I think the crucial thing there, however much we look at allocating towards that, that would come out of our kind of modernisation reserve. It would be a one-off capital cost to refit the reception area. We can reutilise a lot of what we've got in the current centre, we can repurpose that, but it's a one-off capital cost. What these savings are looking at doing is introducing a long-term revenue, year-on-year saving. And I think in terms of, you know, those kind of other options, looking at kind of, could you reduce the hours in the current centre? You could, but it would not realise the savings we need to do. So, as I say, I think, you know, 80% of our footfall already comes in that peak season. So even if we remained in the current building and perhaps reduce that down to a seasonal offer, then in terms of income, you know, we wouldn't lose much, but we would still have all of those staffing costs throughout the winter. We'd still have all the utility bills, etc. So, and that's where we just can't quite square the circle, if you like. It's just the gap is too big to do, and I think, you know, a reduction in the seasonal offering might save a few thousand, but it's not going to save the magnitude of funds that we need to do. And I think just to cover a point, and I think, you know, it was raised by Mr. Bill Gash as well, the savings we've identified here are net savings. We have calculated kind of profit foregone. So, for example, in Lynmouth, where we're reducing the winter opening hours, we've looked at what that spend is currently and what we would lose if we weren't open at those times. And as I think I did mention, that we've allowed for 20% of the current retail profit that we make at Dalberton to be retained in this centre. I honestly feel that's a very prudent and conservative figure. You know, the hope is that we would exceed that. And if we can work with the community and, you know, make this work, then I would hope that we could then extend the opening, for example, if we can kind of better that. But, you know, I guess it's always sensible to be cautious and exceed rather than overpromise and then find ourselves back here having the same discussion in 2 years' time.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
We're not in isolation here. A good point was made about the impact of closing the centre in terms of other facilities within the town centre. I suppose the first question is, what if the Dalberton Centre remains empty? We would then have an empty shop frontage in the centre of town, and that in itself is likely to have an impact on the town centre and other businesses. So that's a what if, and you may have an answer for me on that. I think that's quite important. And of course, you know, the library services themselves are under a lot of pressure. So is there an impact, I think it's been mentioned, I think by Stephen in particular, that if this facility does close, and I've not made my mind up about this at all, if it does close, are we going to be left with an empty shop front in a prominent part of the town? Is that likely to have an impact in terms of the operation of the library, which is vulnerable? And will that have a secondary impact as well on other services within the town? So it's not a question that's easily answered, is it? Because it will have some impacts that we can't possibly accurately predict. And I suppose on that basis, is it a permanent solution, or would there be an opportunity when conditions change, which they inevitably will, would there be the opportunity to, if it was closed, to look again at whether it could be re-established in the town centre? So there's a number of questions, but it centres on, essentially, what if we end up with an empty unit in the centre of the town? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Ben, I think the last question is the easiest to answer, but I think, you know, nothing is forever, is it? And I think there would be, as I say, we've seen a centre here, it's moved into town. If conditions radically change and, you know, we have the funds available, I cannot see why we couldn't potentially go back if we felt that was advantageous at the time. I think in terms of what if it's left empty, and I think, you know, that is $1 million question, and it's you know, as I say, this is the start of a process. We can't really have that conversation until we had a clear direction of travel for our own service. I think because we've allowed ourselves with these proposals that 12 to 18 months before we would actually do anything, there is obviously an opportunity to review our decision today. If it turned out that there were no viable alternatives, then obviously we could have that conversation in kind of 9 months' time to say, hang on, you know, there is something amiss here. I mean, in terms of the library, as you say, they are under enormous pressures. They do have a right to use that part of the building. You know, it's in our ownership, but they have got that interest in it. We have had conversations with Somerset Council about their plans, and we are following that up once we've got a decision today. But I think in terms of the shop front, you know, in the short term, if it was empty for a short term, there are things that we can do. You know, we've invested in that shop front. It's already looking, even if it was empty, if I'm honest, far better than it looked, you know, 12 months ago. And, you know, I think we've kind of got the resources in-house to put displays up, etc., and to at least make it not just a dusty, empty shop front. I think we could do something with it. But as I say, I think long term, it would be our land and property team would be leading on the alternative uses. They feel confident it's in a prime position. You know, and I think what we have seen with Dalton, just like any other town, is a kind of contraction of a town centre. It's focusing more on the core town centre, perhaps less on the peripheries. As we've mentioned, that is a prime position, and there have been one or two people who've already said, well, if it was available, let us know. So, you know, we can't guarantee what would happen, but, you know, there is some confidence there, and as I say, I think there is a chance to review that decision if that proves otherwise.
Thank you. Evening.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for bringing this paper to us, and I understand that the decision making is actually delegated to the Chief Executive, but it's really good that we've been able to have this discussion around this very difficult subject. It's heartening to know that we're not just going to shove a few boards in the existing reception, but that the intention would be to actually have something rather fine that we can be proud of within this building. And I'm assuming that signposting will also be addressed, and that will have to be in partnership with others who own the signposts and own the land that they're on. But the whole idea should be to get people to leave this building and to go to the town. And don't bypass Dalverton. I think that's a message that we've had loud and clear. In terms of Combe Martin and Porlock, I'm just wondering whether we could somehow suggest that there is closer working with Visit Exmoor, which is now a community interest company, and we put funds into Visit Exmoor, and it's an independent organisation, but it could be a benefit to both organisations because being associated with a CIC could unlock funds from other places. So it might be, it's not really within our gift to force this arrangement on anyone, but it could actually be a very beneficial arrangement for all three organisations.
Yeah, but in terms of Porlock, that is already a CIC of its own, so they're constituted as CIC. I have to say, off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact organisation of the museum. I think it's a charitable incorporated organisation, maybe, but it's certainly a charity. And I think, yes, we work closely already with all of these centres. We would continue to do that regardless as to our funding point that was made earlier. We have things like the Exmoor Tourism Network where we try to bring these local organisations together with ourselves, with Visit Exmoor, with those kind of key players to network and to share ideas, etc., and share learning. I think, something like Visit Exmoor, again, they are living fairly hand to mouth in terms of, their memberships, etc. And I think that's when we, even going back to our own centres, when we've been looking at are there others who'd like to take it on or something. I don't think there's anybody that's kind of got the cash reserves to bankroll these in the same way that we have to date. But I think, we could certainly look at how we support them in that way.
Jointly, they may be able to attract wider funds. Sorry. Yeah, that was the point, really.
I think it's helpful. Marcus, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I held up because I wanted to, read the report, thought about the report, wanted to listen to what everybody said, and thank you, Dan, for that, and thank you to the members of the, or say members of the public, but the people who spoke about that. And I have to say, I think I still, somewhere in my hidden old Facebook pages, has saved Minehead Visitor Centre page that for some reason I set up years ago, so I know exactly both sides of this, and I do recall that fighting to get a new visitor centre and many hundreds of thousands of pounds being spent on one, and then 2 years later fighting to stop it from being closed and failing, if I recall. And so it is very difficult, and it gets back to, I suppose, looking at the weighting we put on our park purposes to the benefit to Dulverton, the Dulverton in the town centre, to actually how does that affect us park purposes. And actually from an individual point of view, I'm the sort of person who wants to drive up to a visitor centre, park outside and walk in it. That's if I haven't been looking it all up on an app first. So we do move on, we're in different times, and I understand that financial situation that we're in and the difference that it makes. And again, are we here as a national park, for the purpose of the national park, we do that through, in some way through the visitor centres, or have we got an obligation to Dulverton town centre, and it's getting that balance right as well. And it's a difficult weighting from a planning point of view. I suppose you'd use the word weighting, wouldn't you? So, and I think, picking up what I think Fran said, it's very difficult, and I appreciate, Dan, why you haven't wasted or spent a load of time trying to say this is what it's going to look like downstairs, because it's difficult to make a decision when you don't quite know what you're replacing it with. You've sort of got an idea, which is okay for an individual business. You can make it up as you go along, sort of thing, can't you? I do on many occasions, and change my mind when I wake up in the morning. But this is a little bit different, and I'm really, be honest, I'm with Dan on what he's trying to achieve. Am I overly happy with it? I think it's moving forward. I mean, it's difficult because in the past you've moved one way and now we're moving backwards, but actually are we, by moving backwards, moving forwards? And I think with regard to what others have said about partnership working, and that's a big gap to fill, that £30,000, and for us that's an essential thing that we need to save. And whether in the next 12 months other people come to the table. But I actually think that the location for the park, and it's what we're going to use it for, isn't necessarily the most vital thing. The most vital thing is making sure what's in it is right and it's done right. So I think that's what I'll say on that one, which means that I'm probably leading with the report, leaning towards the recommendations then.
Thanks, Marcus. Francis, I know you put your hand up, but I need to let other people who haven't spoken speak first.
Yes, it's a very but it will be a very tiny little bit of...
Can you keep it very concise, and then you are next?
Okay, thank you very much. I haven't got a crystal ball about about library services. All I can say is that I hope that in our consideration of what should happen to the building, if the vote goes that way, we remember that one of the things the National Park has given to this community is the ability to use the library for hours and hours when the library itself is not open, because it has been accessible, because there's an automatic issuing of books and things. It has been accessible through the National Park Centre. That has been a great gift from National Park. That when its centre was open, the library was available to the population, and I would like to make sure that's kept in the thinking of how we go forward.
Thank you. Nick, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I agree with the speakers that have taken place. Obviously, I'm concerned about the actual visitor centre in Dolverton closing. I believe that if it comes into the Exmoor House, it will be a thin end of the wedge, and effectively it will close because the footfall will decrease. That is my own personal opinion on that basis. I'm a little concerned about the costs that are allocated here. I don't see enough breakdown on costs, because we're looking to see a breakdown on Dolverton, but we don't break down on Linton, Lynmouth and Dunster. And I would like to see a comparison on the basis of that, and how you make a comparison on what's it actually going to cost us, because the costs, as you just said, is going to be a capital investment in here to start with, which I understand. But you know, yes, it comes from one budget, from another budget, but those budgets are still, at the end of the day, a national park is going to have to spend that money either way. So I would like to see the recommendation changed, if that's possible, that we delayed making a decision on the recommendation until such time as we have much more detailed information that goes behind it. Because at the moment, quite frankly, if this was a business and I was presented something like that, then the answer would be go away and come back with more detail, please. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, on a point of order, if someone's declared an interest, can they actually propose an alternative motion?
I think they can, because it was a personal interest.
Oh, right.
You recall. But I have to say, if that was a proposal, I don't have a hand up with a seconder for that. So I'll just leave that on the table so you can think about that one. The next person I have is
Thank you, Chairman. Hard, isn't it? I mean, I've got great sympathy with everybody that's spoken in defence of the existing arrangement, because I can understand that, and I can understand why people want to keep the centre of town as vibrant as it possibly can be, and that change is a scary thing. And would I like to do that? I certainly would. But I remember only an hour ago we were talking about a different report. We were talking about the report about the council's, about the authority's budget, and we were all talking about the council getting bust, and can we afford to pay our staff, and agreed that there was this large deficit to be found in next year's budget, and the one after that, and the one after that, and that we'd have this business review that would look at the things we do in order to make sure that we do them more effectively, cheaply, not necessarily efficiently, but cheaply, to save money, because we need to save money, because what else can we do? But then we get to a situation where we got a proposal to actually do that, and then we as a group here do what we've done so many times in the past, which is prevaricate and and ah and think about kicking the can down the road. But whereas I think we have gone past the time when we can actually afford to keep delaying things. We may not like it, but we don't want to do it. We're being forced to do it. We're being forced to do this and a whole bunch of other things. I mean, like the many, many cuts we've already made that will no doubt, unless things radically change, and that's clearly not going to happen for a considerable while, be similar decisions like this to take in the future. And I'd like to think we would take them more professionally and rather less emotionally, because that's what we've got to do, because we've got to try and preserve the national park purposes. That's our job. So I'd like to move the recommendations as they are, and I know that many members have made sort of suggestions to improve them, and that Mr. James has kind of agreed, sort of nodding and stuff, and that's it really.
Thank you very much, John. Oh, thank you, Susan. So I have one more speaker, and that's Dominic. But before Dominic speaks, I'm going to be terribly naughty and say... John has kind of said
what I was going to follow up on, and you could see what my concern was there. But it's one thing we have not said today, which is worth mentioning. I think it's worth mentioning for people, for the members of the public who turned up, is that the thing we haven't been talking about is, of course, there are many things we want in our communities, many things that we want in our societies. But coming back to what we'd heard today about our budget and the 40% cut in real terms, those are political decisions. That is a political background that we work in. If you are concerned about that political background, then write to your MP, then take political action, because those are the funding decisions that come down the pipe. And then here in this room, we have to make very difficult decisions about what to do. And there's no escaping from those. And that is the hard reality. And sorry about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dominic. I've got... Oh, Andrew, did you want to come back?
Thank you much. Really going on what John was saying, the context of making this decision, and we're talking about Section 114s. The decision we're making is so much easier than are we going to cut mental health care, and I think we have to remember that. And they are still tough decisions, but they're not impacting life. So going through it, I mean, I support the Dunster cost savings fully, the Lynmouth cost savings fully. Porlock one, building what Stephen's saying, if we can provide some support there, then that does make sense, but we do need support with that. And the Coombe Martin, if we can provide support which isn't financial. When it comes to Doverton, the tough one, of course, if we looked at closing any other centres, there's no alternative. We're on the advantage of having this building and maximising this building. Clearly it will impact Doverton and great support for Doverton. So that is, to me, the tough one. But there is the option to have this building. Close Dunster, that's not an option. If we close Lynmouth, that's an option. So I think that needs to be considered.
Thank you. And I'm just going to add to that, is that, and this is a benefit of people listening in and watching this meeting, and for the very eloquent speakers we had earlier, is that we are very aware of the economic impact having this authority based in Doverton has on this community. Very aware of it. And we've had to look at some really difficult things, places that we might go. And I'm going to tell you now that one of them was, do we close this building? And do we relocate our members of our staff? And with remote working post-COVID, we knew that we could do it differently. Now, we have made the decision that we need to keep this open for the economic benefit of this part of Exmoor. And I think we need to remember we need to utilise every inch of this place as best we can to make sure we can keep our presence in Dolverton for the well-being of the wider community, but particularly of Dolverton. So I've got a proposer and a seconder. Can I see all those in favour, please? So that's a counting job there, Judy. Oh, I'm in favour. So that's 15. Those against? 1. Any abstentions? No, thank you. Thank you. Can I thank the members of the public for coming along? You spoke very well. Thank you. Members, we're going to have a 10-minute break, please, if that's okay. Right. Let's restart. So, item 10, governance review, and that's Sarah, our Chief Executive.
Thanks, Chair. Members will remember that back in April we had a paper where we looked at governance review, and there were a series of recommendations in there, and this is really a follow-up to that report after your discussion and guidance back in April. So the 4 recommendations are around creating a planning committee of 12 members, reducing the number of meetings, that's both authority meetings and planning meetings. Both of those would be run as a trial for 12 months. Asking the independent person to look at member allowances and as to whether there are any sensible savings that can be made there, and noting that we will continue to have some discussions with the Exmoor Consultative and Parish Forum, particularly the parish members who are in the room now, about how we take that forward. So I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but just we've had a lot of discussion this morning about the savings gap, and we still, we know where we're going. We're still heading for a fairly large gap in 2 to 3 years' time, which we need to plan for and we need to meet. And as I've said before, we're looking at everything. We're looking at staff costs, at service delivery, at income generation, and in amongst all of that, of course, we're looking at our corporate costs, how we run authority meetings, how we work with members, and trying to make any reductions that we can that don't affect the running of the business. So when we met back in April, we talked about, and started off with the smaller planning committee to start with, and the feeling that we did, compared to other organisations, have quite a large committee discussing a relatively small number of applications. I think there was a general agreement that yes, we should be looking at this, but there was also a concern that, you know, how would this go down with the local community? So we ran a consultation over the summer, and you'll see the results there. About just under 70% of people agreed with us that yes, we could have a smaller committee and we probably could have less meetings. So the first recommendation is that we follow that steer that we've had from staff, from members to an extent, and now from the public, that let's try with a smaller planning committee. The hope that we can get through the business a bit more efficiently and we reduce costs. And we will also, following on from that, move to reducing the number of meetings. So the plan is that we would meet formally like this every other month, that we would probably also meet first Tuesday of the month to do other business, but much of that could be done online. We wouldn't necessarily have to have a meeting in Exmoor House. Not ruling out meetings in Exmoor House, because I think there's a great value sometimes, particularly when we're running things like workshops, or we're going out to look at things on site. So not ruling out those meetings, but saying the presumption would be we get together every 2 months, we have a second meeting every month, but that's less formal sort of business. So the third recommendation is member allowances. I know Mandy, who's sadly not with us today, did a good piece of work looking across all other organisations, and we've looked in a bit of detail at, you know, obviously every organisation does things differently, and there are different reasons for those sort of for the total sums that you see in the column over the page around allowances. But there's a sort of combination that our allowances are, you know, average to reasonable, but we've got quite a lot of members and we have quite a few special responsibility allowances. So without saying any more on that, my recommendation is that we take officers out of this discussion. We ask the independent person to convene a small group of members, representation around parish, local authority and Secretary of State, to have a look at this and come back with their thoughts. And finally, the Consultative and Parish Forum. Again, we had a discussion about whether perhaps it needed to be a bit invigorated, perhaps with less meetings but more focused meetings. We haven't been able to have those discussions in detail yet with the parish members, but we will do that before Christmas, and I think if you can leave that with us to have that discussion with the parish members, that would be really helpful, and come back to you with a way forward on that. We are obviously, there are things going on in the background with staffing and so on, that we are going to have to reduce staffing numbers, and so just bear in mind with all of these discussions, this is to help us to be more efficient in all that we do and try and reduce some of those corporate costs. So we're still running with the timetable. I think it'll set out there. There is a bit of to and fro with this, because obviously the first thing is if it's a member decision, we would then take it back to standing orders to work out some of the detail about how we do this. So as you'll see from the timetable, most of these changes take place next year into March and April as we go into the sort of new way of working. Okay, thank you.
Right, members, over to you. No public speakers. Dominic.
Well, this is great paper. We've discussed it before. We've had all the facts in front of us. I would say, yeah, I propose that we go ahead with it, and yeah, in line with the recommendations that you make. Thanks.
Jeremy, you're the next person I saw.
Second. Thank you.
Sorry, I thought it was my microphone on. Choose them.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really good paper, and thanks to the staff team for going and doing the additional consultation that was asked of them back at the April meeting. I agree with everything on the recommendations. However, I would actually like to propose an additional recommendation. Members remember back when we had this discussion in April, I think several others also raised the issue of the size of the authority board. And as I've spoken before about this, whilst this is not in our gift, to make that decision. I do feel particularly, where the National Park Authority was maybe 10 years ago in terms of staffing levels and authority member numbers, that was maybe more okay, but we've now got, 45 or so FTE staff, and it's probably going to go down, and 22 members, which I do feel is inappropriate in relation to the staff structure and also the very challenging financial environment which we find ourselves in now and also into the future. So I do think that we need to look at this again. I do think also reputationally, as I said before, the public looking in, all these other difficult decisions we're making, but we're still a large board for a small staff complement. So I personally would like to make a recommendation to ask that we would actually write to the Secretary of State to ask how we could move forward with discussions to review the size of our board in the future, or whatever wording is most appropriate. Because I appreciate we can't make those decisions ourselves, we would need guidance. Maybe it's asking for guidance on how we could look to move forward on that in the future.
Okay, well, on that point, we will need somebody to take that. Either the proposer and seconder to take it on, but is there, just on this one point, so there's an additional recommendation. Did anybody want to speak on that? About writing to the Secretary of State, I'll come to you in a minute, writing to the Secretary of State, so that would be me, to talk about how we review the size of this board. So on that point alone, Evelyn.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree with everything that Susan has said. We have had discussions on this before. We have been told that the current statutes wouldn't enable us to do anything about the size. So I think while we're doing all of this other good work, we really should be taking this in hand and getting some advice and start the ball rolling before something's imposed on us that we don't want.
What about Stephen? Did you want to come on that point?
Yes, if I may, but I would like to talk about the other bit. I mean, I entirely understand what Susan's saying, and of course we have been through this process before because we have reduced the size of the committee on previous occasions. But my understanding is it's still a matter of primary legislation. The government, I believe, have told us they're not really very interested in it at the moment. And I slightly feel that it's a complicating factor on what we can actually decide to do ourselves with the paper today. I think it's a point that we shouldn't lose, but I just don't think it's going to get us anywhere actually writing to the government at the moment, and we probably need to be sure about exactly what it is we're going to aim at before we initiate the discussion. It's always a good idea to have an idea of what the end point might be before you start it. And as we know, trying to get the right sort of balance in terms of the makeup of the authority is an important one. So I don't disagree with Susan at all in the aspiration, and this is not, picking up John's point earlier, trying to kick the can down the road. It's actually trying to be clear about what it is we're going to ask for before we ask it. And I don't know that we're quite at that point yet, and add to which I think that it might just end up by confusing the paper before us today. And so I think I would rather see us concentrate on this, but not lose Susan's point, and say, yes, we do definitely need to continue that debate and discussion, but we need to, I think, be clear in our own minds about the outcome that we want before we ask for something.
I think.
Just one moment. I can't write. Whole thing about multitasking. Right, so we've now got several things going. We've got the recommendations, we've got the additional recommendations. So if all the speakers that are coming along could say what they feel about this, and then I'll go back to the proposer and the secretary to see if they will take them on. Are you happy with that, Dominic and Jeremy? Right, so the next person I have on the list is Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I believe that we do need to know what we're going to be asking for before we ask it, because it'll go wrong if we don't. I think it's unlikely that the government is going to have much time for it, but more to the point, I wholeheartedly endorse Stephen's view that we should not be mixing this at the moment with what we practically ourselves can do to save money. And so that's my view on that. Now to go on to what I wanted to say, which is in the same line, that what we need to do is save money. And that's what we should, in this instance, and in this paper, be concentrating on. There is one recommendation here which doesn't save any money at all, and that is the reduction in the planning committee size. It doesn't save any money because the meetings will be held at the same time as authority meetings, so the members will be here. The suggestion is that potentially additional planning meetings could be called if required, but then it's said it's proposed the first Tuesday of the month is retained, and while on some months this might be online, other months that will be face to face. Now, if we make sure that we don't use August and January, which is what we should have been doing for years, and mostly have managed, that means a potential for 4 meetings, and say 2 were in person as opposed to 2 online. So the only bit of extra would be the travelling expenses for a maximum of 2 meetings a year. That does not feel to me a proper justification in money-saving terms for reducing the size of the committee, particularly as I remember members who have long planning experience, both on boards and professionally, have said that they do not believe that we're inefficient or providing poor service in our committee meetings. So I would prefer, and I realise that I'm now saying something else, that we take the recommendations separately, because one of them is not about money saving and the others are.
Thank you, Francis. Mike.
I'm not sure which item I'm speaking to now. But just thinking back a few minutes, I think in terms of the additional proposal, I think it's important we understand what's happening with the Glover review, because of course governance was an important element of that. So it might be on the back of what's being put forward, we try and find out a little bit more in terms of what the recommendations whether those recommendations in terms of governance will be taken forward. So I think that's reasonable. This should hopefully take into account all the concerns, because if we are looking at money saving, and we obviously do know that, this could be quite an important part of it. The only point I'd just say in terms of Francis's last point about the size of the planning committee is that, of course, we did defer it to get the views of parish councils. And we've got those views, and we've got a very strong message coming back. So that's the only point I would say at this point.
Because I was made, may I come back very briefly? Yes. Well, we did, on a past occasion, ask when there were consultation responses to see an annex which gave the consultation responses, because I know from discussions that I've heard at different parish councils that they had difficulty in answering the questions in the way they wanted to because of the way they were framed, and were having to answer very discursively to get around that. And it would have been helpful, and I would always say that, is to have the consultation responses available to members. And that was agreed on another occasion on another subject.
Andrew, you were next.
Thank you, Andrea. I want to talk about the recommendations Susan put forward. And I think, rightly so, before we write, we need to know what the ideal solution looks like. Before we can get to that, I think we need to be clear on the objectives of reducing the number. Is it to save money? Is it improve decision making? But we've got to be clear on that objective. And actually, if you look at the numbers in the table, there's 22. We're not that far off the other authorities. And obviously, what adds to the complication here, we've got the Somerset County Council, Devon County Council, and North Devon District Council, and that is a problem of engagement, really. And so that, again, objective, are we trying to improve engagement, improve decision making, and that has to be thought through and discussed. My experience of dealing with central government, any bodies, you need to know the answer you want before you write, and tell them almost what you're trying to achieve. So I think at this stage, it would be wrong to write. And if I can carry on to answer the second part, the cost savings, I think, are talking about staff reductions, but of course, projections going forward, the staff costs are staying exactly the same. So we're talking about staff reduction costs, right? But is that actually going to be realised? So they're getting back to what are we actually trying to achieve by this? Is it just cost reduction? Is it improved efficiency? Equally, I think something has to be done.
Fran.
Thank you. In regard to Susan's proposal, I think we do need to know what we want to reduce before we sort of write to the Secretary of State. And I am concerned about representation. I mean, are we talking about reducing parish councillors, or are we from the county, from the actual districts, or from the county? Because we all represent different areas. So I think we need to know what we want to achieve by that. And like you say, looking at the table, we're not so different to many others, really. And I'm very supportive of Frances, what she would like to propose of having these recommendations taken separately, because I have tried to get my head around coming here and not being on the planning committee, how that is going to save any money whatsoever. Because if I've got to drive here and I've got to drive home, I'm quite happy to sit here for another couple of hours. Maybe there's some people who don't want to do that, but I really can't see reducing the planning committee making it any more of a cost saving. And I don't know what the consultation said, because as Frances said, we haven't been party to that information, the actual comments. So I would like to have seen those, unless it's something I've missed as well. Thank you.
Evelyn, you wanted to come back.
Is that okay? Yeah, it's just very quick. There's going to be a small member group that's working with the independent person to investigate whether savings can be made on allowances. Now, presumably, if a dozen of our members are planning and authority, and the other 10 are not, then their allowances may very well reflect that. So that would be a saving. You know, depending on if they decide that the member allowances are going to be, you know, I mean, there are ways of making savings. What we can't say is
try not to do the independent person's job for him,
absolutely,
please.
but what I'm saying is we can't say that no savings will be made, because that's just one example of how they might tackle it. They might tackle it in a different way, but we can't say there will be no savings, because there could be savings and it could be different, and there could be two tiers. But my real question was, couldn't the subgroup also be tasked with looking at the amended board size? Because there's a group of people who are going to be looking at just one aspect, which is allowances. Why not ask that group to also look at what's the optimum size, and getting all the information that everyone has identified we need, so that they can make a recommendation to the authority?
Well, we don't have it in our gift to reduce the size of the board anyway, so it would always be a letter from the chairman.
Recommend us, this is the letter that should go to the government.
Thank you. Susan, you're next.
Really quick to come back. I apologise, I didn't wish to muddy the waters of the discussion this morning. That wasn't my intention. My proposal was, to be very honest, born out of a real frustration. My perceived lack of willingness of us as a whole to want to actually relook at the size of our board, and that's a personal perception. And I'm heartened to hear responses around the table this morning about an understanding of the need to explore that, and I do also take on board very much the point of having a bit of an idea about what we want. I don't know what I'm perhaps saying. I don't necessarily want to take it off the table, but I am saying it was born from a huge frustration. I do very much welcome the more proactive response of members to the proposal, and if depending on how we decide to vote on this, I would ask perhaps that then it therefore comes, if we don't want to pursue it today, again, it doesn't fall off the table, and we go, okay, right, we know we need to do a bit of work before we can. If we don't right now, we need to do some work, or we write now and then we do the work, because nothing's going to come back in a hurry, let's face it. So, yeah.
I have to say, at this stage in the parliamentary cycle, I really don't think this is going to be top of their agenda.
So I'm not the best on procedure here, so I can probably not allowed to do what I. So in my format, so do I? Is it better to move that proposal and suggest that instead we look at it? We have the proposal is that we, as well as doing whatever we decide around these other four, that we intend to look at this. We review board size internally as a matter.
The way to go.
Yes. Thank you. Can I do that? I'm sorry, I'm not good at process. It's not my strong suite.
So you are suggesting that we internally look
Yes.
at this with
Yes.
a view to a letter going to Secretary of State.
Absolutely, and we do put a timeline on it, please. So I
Are
don't
we all
sit
happy
here
with that?
in
That
2
element.
years.
Right. That's good. That's an excellent solution. Marcus, you were next.
Well, I was going to support Susan's Susan's proposal, but I do. I mean, yeah, it's not. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I know people have talked about knowing what you want before you ask. Well, there's one empty chair there, but there'd be 16 of us if this room, every table seat was full. That would seem to me like a sensible number. It works for the bigger town councils or the smaller town councils. So I think if someone said to me, well, I think we should be 16, work it out from there. That's a saving of X amount percent, and then somebody else can work out the representation. With regard to everything else, yeah, I agree about reduction of the planning committee. I think it's maybe unwieldy, and it will save in it will save in possible travel expenses. Two, we're talking about reduction of reduced schedule authority and planning meetings, so I'm all in favour of that and have been since the word go, so I'm afraid I can't support any change to that one as well.
Thank you, Marcus. And finally, the last hand I've seen is yours, Stephen.
Oh. Thank you. I have always valued the fact that every member is also a member of the planning committee, because I think it really does increase engagement across the piece of members, and also a broader understanding of one of the principal functions of the authority, because all members sit as planners as well as members of the authority. However, and I will, I think, slightly depart from Francis and Fran on this one. I think one has to recognise the fact that we are where we are. We have spent a long time discussing this. I feel my life ebbing away from me every time the paper comes before. So I think that we will have to move forward with this, although I will be very anxious to make sure that it is for a trial period of 12 months and we do properly assess it and see whether or not it has really achieved the outcomes that we set for it. Because if it hasn't, I think we have to recognise that and be brave enough to say, no, it didn't work, if it didn't. If it did, that's great. So that's point one. Point two, though, practically, if we're going to reduce the size of the planning committee, I would just like it to be noted that the local authority representation it is proposed will be reduced by 50%. The Secretary of State appointee representation, and that includes Secretary of State appointees and the parish members, is being reduced by 40%. So that will mean that in the new planning committee there will be a slightly greater weighting for the Secretary of State appointees than for the local authority representation. So members need to recognise that. A corollary of this is that up to now we've never had to worry about substitutes. We, I think, will need, when we review our standing orders next week, to have part of the discussion at the Standards Committee about how we enable the substitution of members of the Planning Committee. Because at the moment, and I know you're very conscious of this, Madam Chairman, we do have representation on the complete board from constituent local authorities and parish members and Secretary of State appointees. Although statutorily, I think we only have to have one person from within each group, nevertheless, in terms of representation, say, from Devon, I think that it would be unfortunate if we had a planning committee where, for whatever reason, Devon Local Authority members were unrepresented. So I think we do have to consider carefully the opportunities for substitution and how that will be reflected in our standing orders, and consequently the training of those who might be substitutes, because it will be very important to make sure that everybody is properly qualified to sit on the planning committee, whether or not they're a regular member of it or not. So with those observations and with some scepticism, I will be supporting this particular report today, but I will be keeping a very close watch on the actuality of the outcome.
Thanks, Stephen. Jeremy.
Thank you, Chairman, and that was exactly my final point, your final point, Mr. Boatley. Setting up reserve members for the planning committee shows that there is always 12 available. So we need some arrangement for doing that, because reserve members need to have done the training too.
So can I just say that I've spoken to Stephen, as he's alluded to already, and I had noted that, particularly from the Devon side, it goes down to, there's only 4 of us. You know, whoever is on, they have to get the other person if they can, and you know, I accept people have busy lives and you have prior arrangements about substitution. At the moment we are all fully trained, so any of us could substitute on. Mr. Kelly, or Dr. Kelly, is more of an expert in this field than I am, and I remember many times he tried to persuade me to do the planning training at North Devon, and I absolutely refused because I didn't want to sit on the planning committee. But this is a different situation, so we are all trained, and that is something that I know will be coming up next week at the Standards Board. And I also just want to at this point say the other important thing I feel about this is that because we were reducing numbers, that we need to make sure that if you want to come and speak to the planning committee about an item in the area that you represent, because remember these people have no other representation than those of us that have been appointed, then that should be an approved duty. So for example, so to make this clear to people that aren't familiar with how this works, somebody puts an application in Carmarthen. I don't sit on the planning committee. I am the only representative from Carmarthen. I should be able to come here and speak either for or against whatever it is I want to say, just doing the representation, and that should be an approved duty. And I'd like to think the Standards Board will take that on as well, please. So I'm just putting that out there. John's familiar with this anyway. Robin, you are my, I think you are, I'm not going to say that again. Oh, and then the other Jeremy's coming along now. Right, I've got you there.
Lovely, thanks.
You're the penultimate speaker.
Penultimate. Yes, I think looking at the recommendations actually, recommendation 2, absolutely no problem with, 3, no problem with at all, and 4. I think absolutely understood Susan's reason for direction, and I just think that will be important on her comments that we put a timeline, because just for that to remind those people that looked at the Glover Review, what it actually says is it didn't talk about changing the levels of representation. It was talking about an appointed board by DEFRA. Let's have that reality. And there is a reality check that unless we have something positive at some point on a table in front of a DEFRA Secretary of State to give them some direction about what we feel is most appropriate, you may well find that virtually none of us are sitting around this table at all. And there will be an appointed board by DEFRA. That is the reality. So let's be realistic that we need a timeline if we're going to maintain any degree of local input and control, unless there's significant political change. So that was that bit. On recommendation 1, the more I hear the debate, the more confused I get around the change in the planning committee. I must admit, I'm absolutely in favour of changing initially. I must admit, struggle to see where our savings will come on this particular change. That's probably something Stephen didn't ever expect me to hear me say. Having my direction, known my direction about reducing it, I do struggle to see where the savings are. It may provide a more streamlined approach. I do think if we're going down this approach, there's something around. This is quite a lot of work for Standards Committee and the level of changes we're talking about here. because there's something that feels that we're missing the point when we're looking at planning committee and time, and particularly officer input, in that our scheme of delegation is still not something that is anywhere on the table here for planning. And that is the only area to me in which I'm seeing a saving, in particular saving in. But yes, I will support on a trial period anyway. I think the points were raised by Stephen. A real necessity. It is not as simple as 12 members. If you want 12 members here all the time, you are potentially giving Judy a bit more work in order to ensure that she has 12 members here for every meeting. And so you've moved the workload maybe from one person to someone else in an awful lot of the time. It means that every meeting she will need to confirm that she has the full complement of people available for that planning committee, rather than the approach which we have at the moment. So just a comment or two before we move to the vote anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy, I'm not going to say you're the last person.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to make an observation relating to the size of the planning committee, and that is the other aspect of the planning committee is site visits, and just to observe that with 22 members we had to postpone or put off a site visit for a planning issue because there weren't enough people out of 22 to be quorate. So I think there will be an awful lot of difficulty with site visits if there are just 12 people, and there's quite a lot of commitment in terms of those 12 people and making site visits. That was my point.
Thank you. Right. Jeremy, I am being very generous now. This is the third time.
What do we need to be quorate?
That's a good question.
Because that's team 5.
The planning committee would be 8.
Well, that's the bottom line. Thank you.
What, even if there are 12 members?
Yeah, divisible by 3.
That's fine.
As close as.
Yeah, okay.
Chairman, in other places the reserve members is a political thing really, and so each political party then can ensure that their number is there by going to that reserve. But often member services actually appoint someone because they don't get the instruction.
This is a trial. Let's just try it, shall we? I think we're getting, this is just getting a bit down in the detail here. Excuse me, I've got our independent person wishing to speak. I will suspend standing orders, so you may. That'll be helpful, Nick. Thank you.
Just very quickly, as the independent person, I've always understood that Exmoor National Park Authority is not politically party separated. You are all here as individuals. So the question of having the right balance isn't relevant.
That's how it happens in the district.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, this is something the standards board deal with, but I think what they will be focusing on is that you're appointing authority, so you and I are both from Devon County Council. One of us, because there's only 2 of us, will be on this planning committee. Should that person not be able to go, it will be down to that person to phone up the other person and say, can you get yourself to Exmoor House on whatever date it is?
Quite possibly they can't.
But that is a reality of life, that, not everybody is always available for everything and things happen. As I found out to my cost recently, where suddenly I was ill. Stephen.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, I just wanted to reflect on the fact that the proposal next week, if we do form a planning subcommittee of 12, the quorum is a third, so it's 4. And that is why I think substitutes are going to be very important, because if you are seen to be taking important planning decisions with 4 people, I think reputationally that will be damaging to the authority, potentially. So that is why I think it is important that we do try to keep the numbers actually hearing those applications at a reasonable level, and that does, I think, mean that we don't just rely on the quorum, we do try to make sure that we are as near to the 12 as we can be.
Check
Well, I just checked, Judy.
Judy, can you put your microphone on?
The monitoring officer didn't change what we put in, so, but yes, I'll
Okay.
obviously check.
Yeah, if you would, but it's on page 14 of the report for next week.
Right.
I am
Thank you
going to
very
take Bill as the last speaker because I feel we're starting to do the standards committee job for them here.
Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the last word. Somebody who's quite new and listening to the people talking about it, and I know it's been discussed a lot in the past, and it seems a sensible thing to do, and a lot of work's gone into this and the paper and so on. But listening to the people, it seems that there's a fatigue about, we've listened so many times, let's just do it and see what happens. And actually I've heard doubts all around the table about reducing the planning committee and the extra work and issues that might arise going forward. And I just think, I was quite happy to support it. Now I have doubts implanted in my head all around the table. So I'm slightly concerned that we mustn't just do it because we think we should. I think we need to be sure that it's the right thing to do. I know it's a 12-month experiment, and we need to, in which case we really need to make sure that we monitor how much we're saving in resources. I'm really concerned about having enough people. I think the planning committee works well as a whole authority because it means that we're all represented, and we will all want to be represented when we're discussing planning, even if we're not actually on the planning committee. So if we're able to be. So like I say, I was going to support this with absolute surety, and now I'm not sure. Thank you.
I'm just going to do a bit more leading now, which I don't normally do. So I just want to reassure from that comment that I sat on another authority for 20 years, and during those 20 years it was a planning authority. Never once did I sit on the planning committee except when I substituted on very early on in those days. I think after 3 meetings I decided I never wanted to sit on the planning committee again, despite Dr. Kelly trying to persuade me. I never felt I didn't represent my residents. I never felt I wasn't welcome. I've many times turned up to quite major applications, and when I'm talking about the applications we never see here, and I felt I was able to represent my residents, and I hopefully did that eloquently and effectively. I didn't always get what the residents wanted, but actually I had a stronger way of representing them because I wasn't stymied by being a decision maker. I could really go for it. And some people in John never sat on the planning committee, but Jeremy did. Jeremy's heard me. I mean, you can really go for it. If you want to be powerful advocate for your residents, don't sit on the planning committee because you can go for it and you can say all sorts of things that you can't otherwise. I know which is the more powerful role and I know where I want to be. So I'm just going to leave that there. It is a trial. Can I just remind everybody it's a trial? We're all going down the wrong route here, I feel. Very briefly, I will let you come in, Nick.
Just the site visits, does that raise, does it mean that only people who are on the planning committee can go on a site visit?
Any member will be able to go on a site visit if they so wish. No, let's not stir it up. Let's try and keep it pragmatic because, we're setting heads. It is. Any member can go on a site visit. That is absolutely the case.
Sorry, I meant under this trial period, when
Yeah,
you've reduced the number of people who are actually on the planning committee.
Any member can attend a site visit.
But it's a bit pointless though, isn't it, if you're not on the planning committee to attend. All right, sorry.
I think I've just explained well, even though I say myself, why it is a good thing that you are not on the planning committee. So you can attend a site visit. We could all attend any site visit now anyway, anything, about anything. Judy will make sure we all know when they are. If you want to turn up, just let her know. If you're not on the planning committee, we are talking in the future here, and I think that that is very useful. And again, Dr. Kelly will remember I've been on many site visits. I was not a member of the planning committee. And I think it's a very useful thing to go and do. Just going to think that we all need to sort of perhaps hone up a few other skills that we've let lapse somewhat because of what we do. I am not taking any more speakers because we are going round in circles. I don't feel we're achieving anything here.
Are you going to take the recommendation separately?
I am going to... Well, what do you all want me to do?
That is not our proposal.
No. My proposer and seconder, what would you like to do?
The proposal is that we
Do
take
them on
them as
block.
they are proposed here in this document
The efforts of members to overcomplicate the issue are most welcome. It's been an interesting discussion, but I think we have enough to go on, and the trial period issue has been well explained.
The seconder is happy.
In which case, I'm moving to the vote. All those in favour? And against? We've got one against. And abstentions? We've got one. Thank you very much, members. Right, moving on. Oh, and just as addition to that, we have an internal discussion about the size of the board, please, Judy. And I also want to, sorry, I make it like this. I was going to ask you to take this on. I just want to also formally thank Mandy, because lost in all this is that Mandy did do an awful lot of work. So I will actually write to Mandy and thank her for that, to say thank you for doing that. She did put a lot of effort in. It's unfortunate she's not here today. Now, finally, I do have item 11, another business of urgency. So what we need to do, and I will propose this, is we do a 6-month waiver of member attendance rule for one of our members due to ill health. So I will propose that. Can somebody second it, please? All in favour? Thank you very much. I have no more items. We now can close the meeting. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you for being so good at debating.